Long before the engines roared and parachutes bloomed in the night sky, the 82nd Airborne Division existed as an idea more daring than anything the American Army had ever attempted. A force that would fall from the heavens, land behind enemy lines, and fight not with the safety of numbers or the comfort of solid ground, but with the courage they carried in their chests. The men who joined the 82nd did not choose an easy path. They chose the sky. They chose the moment when the door of an aircraft opened at thousands of feet, wind tearing at their faces, darkness stretching out beneath them like an ocean with no bottom. They chose to trust a thin sheet of silk to lower them into a world filled with uncertainty, scattered fields, flooded marshes, enemy fire, broken roads, and missions whispered in the dark. They trained until their muscles burned, and their breath came in ragged gasps. They ran until the horizon blurred. They climbed until their hands bled. They jumped until fear learned their names and stepped aside. To be airborne was not just a role, it was a transformation, a dissolving of hesitation, a reshaping of instinct, a promise that when the sky swallowed them, they would return to the earth, ready to fight for those who still slept beneath its stars. When the war in Europe reached its breaking point, the 82nd was sent to the places where the map offered no mercy. They drifted down over Normandy in darkness so thick it felt alive. They gathered in orchards and hedgerows, forming small groups that fought with the ferocity of entire battalions. They seized crossroads, cut enemy supply lines, and held ground that no one expected any airborne division to hold. Later, in Holland, they descended through sunlight into fields painted in gold, only to find themselves locked in battles that grew heavier with each passing hour. They crossed bridges under fire. They protected routes that armoured divisions depended on. They fought alongside civilians who had waited years to see an American uniform walking through their streets. And when the winter came, the brutal, breath-stealing winter that turned forests into frozen traps, they stood in the Ardennes, their coats too thin, their rations too small, their resolve thicker than the snowdrifts rising around them. They fought through fog, ice, and exhaustion that made every step feel like a decision. They held lines that were never meant to bend. They became the spine of the front in moments when the world wondered if the line would break. The 82nd did not win through ease. They won through endurance, quiet, determined, unshakable endurance. Tonight, we return to their story, to the nights when parachutes drifted like white ghosts over enemy territory, to the days when soldiers moved through ruined towns with careful footsteps and steady breath, to the quiet moments between battles when the world seemed to pause, and exhaustion pressed soft and heavy on every eyelid. Before we continue, I want to ask you something gentle, something only about you. As you settle into the quiet of this night, what kind of comfort surrounds you right now? A warm blanket, a dim light, the softness of a pillow? Tell me the feeling, not the object. And something more emotional, unique to this story. The airborne soldiers learned to trust the fall before they trusted the landing. In your own life, has there been a moment when you stepped into something unfamiliar, not knowing where you would land? If you feel comfortable, share what gave you the courage to take that step. And if these slow, drifting journeys through history help you settle your mind, ease your breathing, or drift gently into sleep, consider subscribing. Camp Gordon, Georgia, August 25th, 1917. A collection of draftees from every state in the Union stands in formation under a brutal southern sun, most still wearing civilian clothes mixed with hastily issued military gear. They have no idea they're about to become part of something legendary. These men, pulled from farms in Iowa and factories in Pennsylvania and fishing villages in Maine, represent a radical experiment in American military organization, a division that will carry the weight of a name and a legacy that hasn't even been created yet. Within 14 months, this ragtag assembly will fight in the bloodiest offensive in American military history and produce the most famous soldier of the Great War. But on this sweltering August day, they're just confused civilians wondering what they've gotten themselves into. The All-American Division wasn't supposed to be special. It was supposed to be symbolic. The War Department deliberately selected men from all 48 states to create a division that represented the entire nation, a propaganda gesture more than a tactical decision. The shoulder patch they would eventually wear, a simple square divided into red, white, and blue sections with the letters AA superimposed, was designed to broadcast this geographic diversity. No other American division could claim such a pedigree. Every other unit drew primarily from a single region or state, but the 82nd was intentionally, almost artificially, constructed to embody the whole country. This diversity would prove both a blessing and a curse. Men who shared no common background or regional identity had to forge cohesion under fire, which either broke units completely or created bonds stronger than those based on shared hometowns. October 1918, Meuse-Argonne Forest, France. A 30-year-old corporal from Tennessee named Alvin York is about to turn the 82nd Division from a symbolic experiment into an American legend. York, a former conscientious objector who'd struggled with the morality of killing, leads a patrol of 17 men deep into German-held forest. They stumble into a German headquarters position. Machine gun fire erupts from multiple directions. Within minutes, 9 Americans are dead or wounded. York, using the marksmanship skills learned hunting turkeys in the Tennessee mountains, begins methodically shooting German soldiers with his rifle and pistol. When a German lieutenant leads 6 men in a charge with fixed bayonets, York shoots them all in reverse order, a trick he'd learned hunting turkeys, where you shoot the back bird first so the others don't scatter. The accuracy is inhuman. Germans begin surrendering. When the shooting stops, York and the 7 surviving Americans have killed 25 German soldiers and captured 132 more, along with 35 machine guns. The 82nd Division suddenly has a mythology that will haunt and inspire every soldier who ever wears the All-American patch. The Great War ends. The 82nd Division returns home, having suffered 991, killed in action during the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. They are demobilized, disbanded, converted to a memory. For 24 years, the 82nd exists only as a veterans organization and a shoulder patch gathering dust in War Department archives. Then, March 25th, 1942 arrives, and with it, an activation ceremony at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana that feels more like a haunting than a celebration. Aging veterans from the First World War gather to watch a new generation of soldiers receive the All-American designation. These new men look impossibly young to the old soldiers. The veterans tell stories, the recruits don't quite believe tales of York's impossible marksmanship, of holding positions against impossible odds, of a division that punched far above its weight. The new 82nd doesn't feel ready to carry this legacy. They're mostly draftees, again, civilians in uniform, unsure why they've been chosen for this particular burden. Then comes the revelation that changes everything. August 15th, 1942. The division is split in half. Half the men are transferred to create a new division, the 101st Airborne. The remaining half retains the 82nd designation and learns they're being converted to an airborne division themselves. The men are stunned. Most had enlisted expecting to be regular infantry. Now they're told they'll be jumping out of airplanes into combat, using a concept that's barely been tested and exists primarily in German doctrine. The division commander, Major General Omar Bradley, oversees the initial transformation for 3 months before being reassigned. His replacement is a lean, intense officer named Matthew Ridgway, who believes absolutely in the airborne concept. Ridgway looks at these uncertain soldiers and sees the future of warfare. The soldiers look at Ridgway and wonder if he's insane. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, October 1942. The first mass training jump of the newly designated 82nd Airborne Division ends with 12% of participants injured. Broken ankles, shattered legs, dislocated shoulders, concussions from bad landings. The medical tents fill with men who never even saw combat. Some injuries are severe enough to end military careers before they truly begin. The army is asking men to override every survival instinct, to leap from a perfectly functional aircraft at 1,200 feet, trusting a silk canopy and some suspension lines to save their lives. The parachutes work most of the time. Most of the time isn't good enough. Soldiers watch their friends carried off on stretchers and wonder if the concept is fundamentally flawed. The Germans had proven airborne operations could work with their assault on Crete in 1941, but that operation had been so costly the Germans never attempted another major airborne operation afterward. The Americans are doubling down on a concept the Germans had essentially abandoned. The numbers tell a brutal story. An airborne division is authorized only 8,321 men, roughly half the strength of a standard infantry division. The theory is that paratroopers, landing behind enemy lines, can accomplish objectives through surprise and speed that regular infantry would need overwhelming numbers to achieve. But this means every paratrooper must be worth 2 regular infantrymen. The physical standards are punishing. The training is designed to break men. The equipment is experimental and unreliable. And hanging over everything is the legacy. Those aging veterans watching from the sidelines, remembering when the 82nd meant something, wondering if these new men jumping from airplanes can possibly measure up to the soldiers who walked through German machine gun fire in the Argonne forest. The pressure is immense and unspoken. History is watching. The dead are watching. Major General Matthew Ridgway is a true believer in a skeptical army. He faces institutional resistance from commanders who see airborne divisions as expensive vanity projects. Traditional infantry generals argue that anything paratroopers can accomplish, regular infantry can achieve with proper artillery support and numerical superiority. Ridgway's counterargument is philosophical as much as tactical. Paratroopers arriving behind enemy lines create psychological chaos that conventional attacks cannot replicate. A German commander facing paratroopers in his rear areas doesn't know how many there are, where they all landed, or what their objectives might be. This uncertainty, Ridgway argues, is as valuable as artillery. But the theory remains unproven by American forces. The 82nd will either validate Ridgway's vision or destroy it. There is no middle ground. An expensive, elite unit cannot afford mediocre results. The soldiers don't think about doctrine or strategic theory. They think about the next jump, the next training exercise, the constant physical punishment designed to forge them into something beyond regular infantry. They're given distinctive uniform items to set them apart: jump boots with extra ankle support, blouse trousers, a special cap. They receive an extra $50 per month in jump pay. These visible distinctions create resentment from regular infantry units who see airborne soldiers as overpaid showboats who haven't proven anything yet. The paratroopers feel this contempt, and it hardens them. They have something to prove to the rest of the army, to the veterans of the old 82nd, and to themselves. The training injuries continue. Men wash out at alarming rates. Those who remain develop a fierce pride mixed with genuine fear about what's coming. They know they'll eventually jump into combat. They know some of them won't survive it. By late 1942, the 82nd Airborne Division exists in a strange liminal space between past and future, between proven legacy and untested theory. The ghosts of Alvin York and the Meuse Argonne dead haunt every formation. The promise of revolutionizing warfare through airborne operations drives every training jump. The soldiers caught between these forces don't have the luxury of contemplating their place in military history. They're too busy trying not to break their legs on landing, too focused on mastering equipment that seems designed to kill them as efficiently as any enemy. But something is being forged in this crucible of legacy and innovation, pressure and pride. The 82nd is becoming something that doesn't quite exist anywhere else in the American military, a unit carrying the weight of past glory while attempting to create an entirely new form of warfare. Whether this combination will produce brilliance or disaster remains to be seen. The men loading into transport aircraft for another training jump don't know yet that they're about to find out the hard way in the skies over Sicily, where theory collides with reality and legends are either born or destroyed. Fort Benning, Georgia. November 1942. A soldier stands at the door of a 250-foot steel tower, looking down at the ground that seems impossibly far away. His hands grip the doorframe so tightly his knuckles have gone white. Behind him, an instructor is shouting, but the words don't register over the roaring in his ears and the hammering of his heart. This is the moment that separates men who will become paratroopers from men who will return to regular infantry. The tower is designed to simulate the height and terror of an actual jump without the complexity of an aeroplane. It teaches men to override the most fundamental human instinct, the screaming certainty that stepping into empty air means death. Every man who refuses this moment is immediately reassigned. There is no shame in it, the army says, but there is. The soldier closes his eyes, forces his feet to move, and steps into nothing. The training regimen for the 82nd Airborne is deliberately, almost sadistically brutal. This isn't an accident or the result of cruel instructors, it's doctrine. The theory is simple and merciless. Airborne operations will be chaos, confusion, and terror. So training must replicate those conditions until men stop breaking under them. Physical standards exceed anything required of regular infantry. A 5-mile run in full gear must be completed in under 40 minutes. Road marches stretch to 18 miles and must be completed in less than 4 hours while carrying 80+ pounds of equipment. Immediately after these marches, units conduct mock combat exercises. There is no rest, no recovery time. Men who can't maintain the pace are removed. The washout rate reaches 42% compared to 8% for regular infantry training. This isn't creating better soldiers, it's selecting the ones who are already capable of withstanding extreme physical and psychological stress. The T-5 parachute that will carry these men into combat is an engineering marvel and a death trap in equal measure. The 28-foot canopy deploys, when it deploys correctly, to arrest a jumper's fall from 1,200 feet in approximately 15 seconds. The descent rate is 22 feet per second, the forward speed is 10 miles per hour. Jumpers hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb impact, frequently injuring ankles, knees, and spines anyway. The parachute malfunction rate in training is documented at 1 in 1,200 jumps. 1 in 1,200 sounds acceptable until you're the one standing in the aircraft door knowing that today might be the day your number comes up. Reserve parachutes exist, but deploying them at the standard jump altitude of 1,200 feet leaves almost no time for the backup canopy to open. Men who experience malfunctions frequently don't survive to report what went wrong. December 1942 brings a night that haunts the division. 3 men die during a routine night training jump when their main parachutes fail and their reserve chutes don't have time to deploy properly. The next morning, training continues exactly as scheduled. There is no pause for grief, no safety stand down to investigate what went wrong. The message is clear and brutal. Paratroopers die in training, paratroopers will die in combat, and the mission continues regardless. Men who knew the dead soldiers personally must load into aircraft that same day and jump from the same altitude that killed their friends hours before. Some refuse and are immediately reassigned. Most jump. The act of jumping anyway becomes its own form of psychological conditioning. Fear doesn't disappear, but the capacity to act despite fear becomes automatic. This is what the training is actually selecting for, not fearlessness, which is psychopathic, but the ability to function while terrified. The physical punishment has a clear purpose, but some training seems designed purely to establish psychological dominance. One incident becomes legendary within the division. An entire regiment is subjected to mass punishment when a single soldier falls asleep on guard duty during field exercises. The punishment is a forced march that lasts through the night, followed by immediate combat drills at dawn. Men are vomiting from exhaustion, collapsing from dehydration, but the exercise continues until officers are satisfied that the lesson has been absorbed. The lesson isn't about guard duty, it's about collective responsibility. In combat, scattered behind enemy lines, paratroopers will need to function as small, independent teams where every man's reliability is absolute. One failure can doom an entire unit. The training builds this understanding into muscle memory and group psychology. Tennessee maneuvers in January 1943 pushed the division to the edge of mutiny. An 18-mile forced march must be completed in under 4 hours with full combat loads. Men are carrying more than 80 pounds. The pace is punishing. Soldiers who fall behind are verbally destroyed by instructors called weak, told their failures, who will get their entire unit killed in combat. Immediately upon completing the march, with men gasping for air and legs trembling from exertion, the division conducts mock combat operations. There is no rest. The entire exercise is designed to simulate the reality of airborne operations. You will land exhausted and disoriented, and you will immediately be in combat. Training under fresh, rested conditions would be pointless. Some men break psychologically during these exercises. They don't quit dramatically, they simply stop responding to orders, their minds retreating from reality. These men are removed quietly and reassigned to duties where mental breakdown won't kill their comrades. Major General Matthew Ridgway's command philosophy permeates every aspect of training. Every man a rifleman first, specialist second. In regular infantry divisions, soldiers specialize, some become machine gunners, others mortarmen, still others radio operators. Ridgway refuses this approach for airborne forces. His reasoning is grimly practical. Paratroopers will land scattered and disorganized. Units will be mixed up. Specialists might be separated from their equipment. Every soldier must be capable of performing every basic infantry task without support. A radio operator must be able to command a squad if his lieutenant is killed. A medic must be able to assault a position if he's the only one available. This philosophy requires training that's broader and deeper than regular infantry receives, which means the training timeline is longer and the physical demands are higher. Men learn to operate every weapon in the airborne arsenal, perform every tactical role, navigate without support, and make command decisions without officers present. The 504th and 505th Parachute Infantry Regiments form the core of the division, with the 508th added later. These regiments develop distinct cultures and fierce rivalries. The 505th considers itself the premier regiment because it trained first. The 504th mocks the 505th as parade ground soldiers and claims to be tougher. These rivalries are encouraged by command because they drive competitive excellence. Regiments compete in training exercises, trying to outperform each other in speed, accuracy, and endurance. The competition creates internal pressure that makes external pressure from instructors almost redundant. No soldier wants to be the one who makes his regiment look weak compared to the others. This competitive culture will later manifest in combat, where regiments will take suicidal risks rather than appear less capable than their sister units. By March 1943, the final qualification standard is established. 5 jumps, including 1 night jump, 1 equipment jump, and 1 mass tactical jump. Men who complete all 5 receive their parachutist badge, silver wings that mark them as different from regular infantry. The badge carries immense psychological weight. It's visual proof of having conquered fear repeatedly, of having survived a selection process that broke 4 out of 10 candidates. Regular infantry soldiers see the wings and either respect them or resent them. There's no neutral reaction. Paratroopers wear the wings with fierce pride, mixed with the knowledge that they've only proven they can jump from airplanes in training. Combat will be the real test, and nobody knows if training has actually prepared them or just given them false confidence that will get them killed. The training regime of the 82nd Airborne creates a specific type of soldier, physically elite, psychologically conditioned to operate in chaos, intensely proud of their unit identity, and carrying enormous pressure to prove that all the extra training and expense was worth it. These men don't know yet that they're about to be thrown into Sicily with equipment that barely works and intelligence that's completely wrong. They don't know that their first combat operation will be such a disaster that the entire airborne concept nearly gets cancelled. They only know that they've survived something that broke thousands of other men, that they wear wings that mark them as special, and that they're about to find out if special is enough when German bullets start flying. The answer will come soon, in the night skies over Sicily, where all the brutal training will either validate Ridgway's vision or prove that breaking men to make paratroopers was just breaking men for nothing. Wright Field, Ohio, January 1943. Engineers watch a test dummy plummet from a tower wearing the new T-7 parachute. The canopy opens, the dummy descends safely. They repeat the test. Again, success. 1,200 tests show a failure rate of 1 in 1,200, which the Army deems acceptable losses. What acceptable means in clinical terms is this. Out of every 1,200 paratroopers who jump into combat, 1 will die from equipment failure before ever encountering the enemy. That's not counting landing injuries, mid-air collisions, or men shot while helpless in their harnesses. That's just the parachute choosing not to open. The engineers write their reports. The Army accepts the numbers. Nobody asks the soldiers loading into aircraft if they find these odds acceptable. Statistical acceptability and individual mortality are very different calculations, and only one of them matters when you're standing in an aircraft door at 1,200 feet. The C-47 Skytrain is supposed to be the perfect aircraft for parachute operations. It cruises at 92 miles per hour, can carry 24,000 pounds, and holds 18 fully equipped paratroopers in uncomfortable canvas seats along the fuselage walls. The side door is wide enough for rapid exit. The aircraft is reliable and easy to fly. On paper, it's ideal. In practice, it has crippling limitations that will kill men. The navigation equipment consists of basic instruments and visual landmarks. At night, in clouds, or over unfamiliar terrain, pilots frequently have no idea where they are. The radio equipment is unreliable and often jammed by German interference. The aircraft has no defensive armament beyond what the crew chief can fire from the door with a handheld weapon. When German flak opens up, C-47 pilots must choose between maintaining course, exposing their unarmored, fuel-laden aircraft to longer periods of fire, or taking evasive action that scatters paratroopers over huge areas. Both choices kill men. Neither choice is wrong. Camp Edwards, Massachusetts. May 1943. General Dwight Eisenhower arrives to observe a demonstration jump by the 82nd Airborne. 200 men exit their aircraft in textbook fashion. Eisenhower watches through binoculars as the paratroopers descend. Then the landings begin. Men hit the ground hard. 7 suffer serious injuries, broken legs, shattered ankles, dislocated shoulders requiring immediate medical evacuation. This is a demonstration jump conducted in daylight over familiar terrain with hand-picked soldiers performing for the Supreme Commander. 7 serious injuries out of 200 jumpers is a 3.5% casualty rate. before a single shot is fired. Eisenhower's face reveals nothing, but his staff exchanges worried glances. If a perfect demonstration jump produces this level of injury, what will combat jumps look like? Nobody wants to calculate those numbers publicly. The equipment paratroopers must carry creates physics problems nobody has adequately solved. Standard combat load is 120 pounds per man weapon, ammunition, rations, water, medical supplies, demolitions, radio equipment for some, and specialized gear for others. Men train with 60-pound loads because carrying 120 pounds makes aircraft exits so slow they'd be sitting ducks. The discrepancy between training load and combat load means soldiers have never actually practiced jumping with the weight they'll carry into battle. The solution is the leg bag system, a canvas bag containing weapons and heavy equipment attached to the jumper's leg, released 50 feet before landing via a 20-foot rope. In theory, the bag hits the ground first, reducing the weight the paratrooper carries during landing. In practice, men frequently release too early or too late. Bags are lost entirely, ropes tangle, and soldiers land carrying full weight anyway and shatter their legs on impact. The radios are almost useless. The SCR-300 backpack radio has a theoretical range of 3 miles under ideal conditions. Ideal conditions never exist in combat. Buildings, terrain, weather, and German jamming reduce effective range to less than a mile. Airborne doctrine expects paratroopers to operate 30 miles behind enemy lines. Without reliable communications, scattered units have no way to coordinate actions, report intelligence, or call for support. The handheld SCR-536 handy-talkie has even shorter range, half a mile at best. The solution, according to Army planners, is that paratroopers should operate independently without requiring coordination. This isn't doctrine born from tactical brilliance. It's doctrine born from technological limitation. The radios don't work well enough to coordinate operations, so the official plan becomes everyone figure it out on your own. Pathfinder teams represent the Army's attempt to solve the navigation problem. 12 specially trained men equipped with Eureka radar beacons will jump first, marking drop zones for the main force. The theory is elegant. Pathfinders land, set up beacons, and guide in the transport aircraft with theoretical 1-mile accuracy. The reality is that Pathfinders themselves must land accurately to mark the correct zones, which requires them to navigate without the beacons they're supposed to be setting up. Also, Pathfinders jump with even heavier loads than regular paratroopers because they're carrying beacon equipment in addition to combat gear. And Pathfinders land in enemy territory first, alone, in the dark, making them priority targets for German forces who quickly learn that killing Pathfinders disrupts entire operations. Being a Pathfinder is essentially volunteering to jump first, carry more weight, and die before anyone else. Artillery support for airborne operations is a joke. Regular infantry divisions have towed artillery and mechanized guns. Paratroopers get the 75mm pack howitzer, a World War I era weapon that must be broken into 9 separate pieces, each piece parachuted separately in padded containers, then reassembled after landing. The process requires the crew to land near their gun pieces, find all 9 containers in the dark behind enemy lines, and somehow assemble a functional artillery piece while under fire. Unsurprisingly, airborne units frequently go into battle with minimal or zero artillery support. The official solution is that airborne operations are supposed to be brief, seize an objective, and hold until regular forces with proper artillery arrive. This timeline assumes the enemy cooperates by not counterattacking aggressively, an assumption that German forces will violently disprove. Laurenburg-Maxton, Army Air Base, North Carolina. March 1943, C-47 Pathfinder navigation trials achieve 60% accuracy in finding designated drop zones in daylight over familiar terrain. 60% accuracy means 4 out of 10 aircraft can't find their targets under the best possible conditions. At night, over unfamiliar territory, under fire, accuracy will be worse, much worse. But the Sicily invasion is already being planned, and airborne operations are a key component. The equipment isn't ready, the technology is immature, the doctrine is untested under real combat conditions. None of this slows the planning. The 82nd Airborne will jump into Sicily with equipment that barely functions because the strategic timeline doesn't care about technological readiness. Generals make plans based on what they wish existed, and soldiers discover what actually exists when they jump out of airplanes into the dark. The M1A1 carbine becomes the standard paratrooper weapon after the M1 Garand proves too long for quick aircraft exits. The carbine is lighter, shorter, and fires a less powerful round that's adequate for close-quarters combat but inferior at range. Paratroopers are trading firepower for convenience, a compromise that will cost lives when they face German infantry with superior weapons. Every piece of equipment represents similar compromises. Lighter weight means less capability, smaller size means shorter range, simpler design means less reliability. The 82nd is being sent to revolutionize warfare with equipment optimized for fitting through aircraft doors, not for winning gunfights. The soldiers don't make these decisions. They inherit the consequences. And in Sicily, those consequences will be measured in bodies scattered across the Italian countryside. Men who died because their radios didn't work, their parachutes landed them in the wrong place, and their weapons jammed at the critical moment. The equipment gamble is being made with other people's lives. Night of July 9th to 10th, 1943. 3,400 paratroopers of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment sit in C-47 aircraft, droning towards Sicily. Below them, Mediterranean waves catch moonlight. Ahead, somewhere in the darkness, is the island that will either validate American airborne doctrine or destroy it. Colonel James Gavin, regimental commander, checks his watch and equipment for the 10th time. Intelligence briefings promise light opposition coastal defense units, mostly Italian troops of questionable morale. The drop zones are clearly marked on maps. The plan is precise. Everything should work. Gavin feels the aircraft shudder as it enters Sicilian airspace, and anti-aircraft fire begins. The pilot takes evasive action. The formation scatters. Gavin realizes in that moment that everything they've been told is wrong, and everything they've planned is falling apart. The winds over Sicily are hurricane force, 35 miles per hour gusting to 45, far exceeding safe jump conditions. Nobody briefed the pilots about this. The transport aircraft scatter to avoid flak, braking formation. Jump lights illuminate. Men shuffle toward doors. The jump master's signal comes. Paratroopers exit into chaos. The wind grabs them immediately, blowing them sideways and backwards. Men who should land in a tight 2-mile area are scattered across 60 miles of Sicilian countryside. Some land in the ocean and drown, their heavy equipment dragging them under before they can release it. Others land in trees, on rooftops, in vineyards, on rocks. The equipment, leg bags release or don't, tangle or function, leave men with weapons or without them. Paratroopers hit the ground alone, disoriented, with no idea where they are or where anyone else is. This is not the plan. This is not training. This is catastrophe. 2 o'clock in the morning, July 10th, Colonel Gavin lands in a vineyard and immediately takes cover. He blows his whistle, the signal for assembly. Nobody responds. He moves cautiously, finds one other paratrooper, then another. It takes hours of moving through the darkness, avoiding what might be enemy patrols, following whistle signals to assemble a group. By dawn, Gavin has found 250 men from different companies, different battalions, carrying random assortments of equipment. He should have 1,600 men under his command. He has 15% of his force. The rest are scattered across Sicily, dead, captured, lost, or assembling into other groups, equally confused. Intelligence said light opposition. The Germans attacking Gavin's position are from the Hermann Goering Panzer Division, elite troops with tanks and artillery. Everything about the situation is wrong. Piazza Ridge becomes the accidental masterpiece of improvised warfare. Gavin and his collected strays, they're not a unit, just whoever happened to assemble in the same area realize they're in the path of a German armoured counterattack heading for the beaches. 250 scattered paratroopers against 2,000 Germans with tank support. Doctrine says withdraw, call for support, avoid engagement. Doctrine assumes you have communications and support to call for. Gavin has neither. He has rifles, a few machine guns, one bazooka with 3 rounds, and men who jumped into Sicily expecting to fight demoralized Italians and instead found veteran German panzer troops. The decision is simple. Hold this ridge and the Germans can't use this road to reach the beaches, or withdraw and let enemy armor roll through. Gavin chooses to hold. For 11 hours, 250 Americans fight 2,000 Germans to a standstill. The fighting at Piazza Ridge should be impossible. Small arms against tanks, exhausted, scattered paratroopers against organized German infantry. But the chaos that destroyed American planning is creating German confusion. The Germans don't know how many Americans are on that ridge. Every time they probe, they encounter fire from different positions. The Americans keep moving, creating the illusion of force strength they don't have. The single bazooka teams fire, displace, fire again, making the Germans think there are multiple anti-tank weapons. When the bazooka rounds run out, paratroopers rig improvised explosives. The Germans are cautious, methodical, sure they're facing a larger force than actually exists. They've never encountered American paratroopers before and don't know what to expect. The confusion saves American lives. Finally, after 11 hours, artillery support arrives from forces advancing inland from the beaches. The Germans withdraw. Gavin's men, beyond exhausted, hold the ridge. Mission accomplished through sheer, bloody improvisation. Night of July 11th to 12th brings an entirely different horror. The 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment loads into 144 C-47s for a reinforcement jump. They're supposed to land near American-held positions, join the fight, turn Sicily chaos into Sicily victory. The flight path takes them over the Allied naval fleet. Nobody properly coordinates the timing. Nobody ensures the Navy knows friendly aircraft will be overhead. The C-47s approach Sicily. Allied ships, trigger-happy after days of German air attacks, open fire. 23 aircraft are shot down. 318 paratroopers die before they can jump, killed by their own side's anti-aircraft fire. 160 more are wounded. The surviving aircraft scatter, those pilots still willing to fly through friendly fire dumps paratroopers anywhere they can. The reinforcement operation becomes another scattered mess, except this time, Americans killed Americans before Germans got the chance. Piano Lupo, July 11th. While large unit operations collapse into chaos, small groups of paratroopers are achieving things no planner expected. A dozen men from the 505th cut German communications lines, creating impression of a much larger force. Another group stumbles on an Italian supply depot and destroys it. Scattered three-man teams set up roadblocks that stop German vehicle movement for hours until the Germans realize they're only facing a handful of soldiers. The chaos works both ways. The Americans don't know where they are or what they're doing, but neither do the Germans. Every time German forces encounter American paratroopers, they assume it's an organized unit executing deliberate plans. They don't realize they're fighting tiny groups of lost soldiers who are improvising everything. The psychological impact far exceeds the physical presence. The Germans are convinced Sicily is swarming with American paratroopers. The reality is a few thousand scattered, confused men who happen to keep appearing in inconvenient places. The butcher's bill arrives within 48 hours. 229 killed in action, 598 wounded, 410 missing, many of whom will later return, having been too scattered to link up with any unit. But the objectives are secured. Every mission assigned to the 82nd seize crossroads, cut communications, prevent German counterattack has been accomplished despite catastrophic dispersion. General Eisenhower reviews the results and nearly cancels all future airborne operations. The casualties from friendly fire alone are unacceptable. The equipment failures are worse than predicted. The dispersion is far beyond anything in training, and yet, somehow, scattered paratroopers achieve their objectives faster than organized beach landing forces. The contradiction is maddening. Sicily proves airborne operations are catastrophically flawed and remarkably effective simultaneously. Colonel Gavin writes in his after-action report, "Dispersion was so great that it worked to our advantage. The enemy never knew where we were or in what strength." This is not a ringing endorsement of doctrine. This is an admission that success emerged from failure so complete it confused everyone equally. The 82nd survives institutional cancellation by the narrowest margin. Ridgway argues passionately that Sicily's lessons show how to improve, not abandon, airborne operations. Eisenhower, skeptical but willing to be convinced, allows planning for future jumps to continue. But the shadow of Sicily hangs over everything. The 82nd has proven it can survive chaos. It hasn't proven chaos is a strategy. The paratroopers returning from Sicily are no longer the confident soldiers who loaded into aircraft days before. They've learned that plans are fiction, that equipment will fail, that you'll land alone in the dark and have to figure out what to do next without help. This knowledge will either make them more effective or destroy their morale entirely. The next operation will reveal which Algeria, July 25th, 1943. General Dwight Eisenhower's headquarters. The conference room is thick with tension and cigar smoke. Senior commanders gather for the most important meeting about airborne operations in the war, whether there should be any more at all. The Sicily casualty reports lie on the table. 318 dead from friendly fire, hundreds more scattered so widely some didn't rejoin units for days. Major General Matthew Ridgway sits at the table knowing the 82nd's survival as an airborne division depends on the next hours. Across from him, commanders who never believed in the airborne concept sharpen their arguments for abolishing these expensive casualties-heavy units. The room divides clearly between those who see Sicily as proof airborne operations are fundamentally flawed and those who see it as proof they've been executing them wrong. The statistics damn the concept. Airborne divisions cost 3 times more to train than regular infantry. They sustain twice the casualty rates. And for what? Every objective the 82nd seized in Sicily could have been, and eventually was, taken by conventional infantry advancing from the beaches. The friendly fire losses alone exceed acceptable bounds. 23 aircraft shot down by their own navy represents catastrophic coordination failure. The counter that paratroopers seized objectives faster rings hollow when the time advantage is measured in hours, while the training investment is measured in months, and the cost overrun is measured in millions of dollars. The accountants have a point. War is mathematics, resources invested versus results achieved. By this calculation, airborne divisions are an expensive indulgence the American military cannot afford. Ridgway's defense is partly statistical and partly philosophical. Yes, dispersion was catastrophic, but scattered paratroopers seized objectives with only 15% of assigned forces. This suggests that properly concentrated forces could achieve exponentially greater results. Yes, friendly fire was unacceptable, but this reflects coordination failures, not flaws in the airborne concept itself. Yes, casualties were high, but the psychological impact on German forces far exceeded physical presence. Intelligence intercepts show German commanders convinced Sicily was defended by far more American paratroopers than actually existed. Small, scattered units created strategic confusion worth divisions. This asymmetric warfare potential, forcing the enemy to defend everywhere because they don't know where you'll appear, justifies the investment. Eisenhower listens. He's skeptical but not close-minded. He tables the decision to abolish airborne divisions. The 82nd survives, barely. Sicily, August 1943. While generals debate doctrine, paratroopers debrief their own experiences. The conclusions emerging from enlisted ranks differ sharply from those in conference rooms. Soldiers report that dispersion, while terrifying, became advantageous once they stopped trying to reassemble into planned units. Small groups operated with flexibility, large formations couldn't match. 3 men encountered less resistance than 300. They moved faster, hid easier, and struck targets before defenders realized they were threatened. The official plan assumed concentrated force. Actual combat rewarded distributed action. This creates doctrinal whiplash should training prepare men for the plan, or for what actually happens when the plan collapses. The answer, emerging from Sicily debriefs, is both and neither. Train for the plan so everyone knows what's supposed to happen, but train individuals to operate independently when it doesn't. The mechanical solutions are easier than the doctrinal ones. Friendly fire from the Navy is unacceptable, therefore better coordination between air and naval forces. Navigation failures scattered the drops, therefore improved Pathfinder doctrine. Communication blackouts left units isolated, therefore more radio equipment and better operator training. Each problem has a solution, at least theoretically. Pathfinder teams will expand to 20 men with better navigation equipment, jumping 1 hour ahead of main forces to establish and mark drop zones. New recognition signals, coloured smoke, holophane lights, radar beacons with improved range will guide aircraft more precisely. Pilots will receive additional training specifically for airborne operations. These improvements sound decisive. Whether they'll work in practice won't be known until the next combat jump. Kairouan, Tunisia. September 1943. The 82nd begins retraining based on Sicily lessons. The changes are subtle but profound. Squad-level training increases dramatically. Previously, training focused on company and battalion operations, large unit tactics. Now, squads train to operate independently for extended periods without support. Every soldier learns basic navigation, radio operation, and decision-making previously reserved for NCOs and officers. The assumption underlying this training is brutal. Officers and NCOs will be killed or separated, and privates will need to accomplish missions alone. This isn't pessimism, it's Sicily reality. The youngest, lowest-ranking soldiers must be capable of independent action because chaos guarantees they'll face situations requiring it. The cricket emerges from Sicily's confusion. It's a small metal clicker, a child's toy really, that makes a distinctive click-clack sound. 1 click, wait for response. 2 clicks means friendly. It's simple, audible in darkness, and doesn't require electronics that might fail. In Sicily, paratroopers trying to identify each other in darkness frequently shot friendlies or got shot themselves. Passwords worked poorly because frightened men forgot them or couldn't pronounce them correctly under stress. The cricket solves this with elegant simplicity. Click-clack, 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 friend. The detail is tiny but represents the shift in thinking high-tech solutions failed in Sicily. So use the simplest thing that actually works. Paratroopers headed for Normandy will carry crickets as standard equipment, a direct inheritance from Sicily's lessons written in blood. The institutional learning extends beyond equipment to psychology. Sicily revealed that scattered paratroopers accomplish missions not despite dispersion but sometimes because of it. This reverses conventional military wisdom that concentration equals strength. For airborne operations, dispersion creates uncertainty for the enemy. A German commander facing scattered reports of American paratroopers must defend multiple locations simultaneously. He doesn't know where the main effort is because there is no main effort, just dozens of small efforts creating cumulative pressure. This realization shifts training toward aggressive independent action rather than defensive consolidation. Don't spend hours trying to assemble your scattered unit. Start attacking objectives with whoever you've got. This doctrine is revolutionary and terrifying. It demands soldiers make aggressive tactical decisions without orders, support, or clear information. Most armies couldn't execute this doctrine. Most soldiers would freeze, waiting for orders that never come. The September retraining incorporates one more Sicily lesson. Expect intelligence to be wrong. Briefings promised light Italian resistance. Reality delivered veteran German panzer troops. This discrepancy nearly killed everyone. Post-Sicily training includes scenarios where intelligence is deliberately misleading. Units briefed to expect minimal resistance and counter heavy opposition in exercises. The goal is to condition men not to rely on intelligence estimates, to be ready for the worst regardless of what they're told. It's a damning commentary on military intelligence that training must prepare soldiers to disregard briefings entirely. But Sicily proved the necessity. Better to assume every jump will land on elite German troops in hurricane winds at the wrong location than to trust plans that evaporate on contact with reality. By late September 1943, the 82nd has transformed Sicily's disaster into doctrine. The changes aren't revolutionary: better navigation, improved training, realistic expectations, but collectively they represent the difference between experimental chaos and professional chaos. Airborne operations will always be chaotic. The new doctrine just makes chaos the starting assumption rather than the failure state. The soldiers absorbing these lessons don't know their next combat jump is still months away. They don't know Sicily's lessons will be tested in Normandy, where everything will go wrong, again but differently, where all the improvements will help but won't prevent catastrophe. They only know they survived Sicily when many didn't, and whatever comes next, they'll face it with fewer illusions about what war looks like when you jump from aeroplanes into the dark. The illusions are gone, the mission continues. Sicily was the baptism. Normandy will be the test of whether they learned anything from drowning, Belfast, Northern Ireland. November 1943. The 82nd Airborne Division disembarks from transport ships into cold rain and wind that cuts through uniforms like knives. The locals gather at the docks to watch Americans arrive, with a mixture of curiosity and concern. They've seen British troops for years, grim and worn down by war. These Americans are different, loud, confident, seemingly unaware that war is something to be survived rather than enjoyed. The Irish watch paratroopers swagger through Belfast streets with jump boots and wings displayed prominently, and wonder if this confidence is strength or naivety. The Americans wonder if they'll ever feel warm again. Northern Ireland in winter is a miserable posting, cold and wet and far from anything that matters. But it's also safe, which allows the division to rebuild, retrain, and prepare for the invasion everyone knows is coming, but nobody will confirm. The training schedule from November 1943 through May 1944 is relentless. Every lesson from Sicily is drilled into muscle memory. Navigation exercises at night over unfamiliar terrain, squad-level operations without officer supervision, radio procedures practiced until they're automatic, Jump training continues with new modifications, tighter formations, better exit procedures, improved equipment checks. The failure rate drops. 60% of paratroopers now land within 1 mile of intended drop zones during training exercises, compared to 40% before Sicily. This improvement is dramatic, but still inadequate. 40% landing outside the zone means thousands of men scattered across enemy territory in actual operations. The training can't eliminate dispersion, it can only reduce it. Every jump remains a controlled catastrophe, hoping not to become an uncontrolled one. Leicester, England. March 1944. The division moves from Ireland to England as invasion preparations accelerate. Here, in the English Midlands, something unprecedented happens. Terrain models are constructed showing Normandy coastline in exact detail, every hedgerow, every building, every road and stream. These models are classified top secret. Paratroopers study them for hours, memorizing their specific sectors. A private from Ohio can close his eyes and visualize the exact field where he's supposed to land, the road he's supposed to reach, the bridge he's supposed to secure. This level of detailed preparation is extraordinary. It's also slightly absurd because everyone remembers Sicily, where detailed planning meant nothing when winds scattered men across 60 miles. But the models provide psychological comfort. Knowledge creates illusion of control. Illusion of control makes the fear manageable. The division's strength for Normandy reaches 11,770 men, organized into 3 parachute infantry regiments, 505th, 507th, 508th plus supporting elements. The 507th is new, formed after Sicily to replace losses and expand capability. Integration of a new regiment creates tension. The 505th considers itself the elite, the original, Sicily tested. The 507th has to prove itself worthy. The 508th occupies the middle ground, neither original nor newest. These internal hierarchies and rivalries would be petty, except that they drive competitive excellence. No regiment wants to be the one that fails in Normandy. Pride is a weapon sharper than any blade. Equipment improvements reflect Sicily's lessons. The M1A1 carbine is now standard, replacing the too long M1 Garand. Improved parachutes with backup reserves attached differently, reducing failure rates marginally. Better leg bags with improved release mechanisms that actually work most of the time. The SCR 536 handy-talkie radio is distributed more widely, giving squad leaders direct communication within limited range. None of these improvements are revolutionary. They're incremental gains, measured in percentage points, but percentage points mean lives. A 2% reduction in parachute malfunction rate means 20 fewer deaths in a 10,000-man drop. The soldiers don't think in percentages, they think, will my chute open? The engineers and quartermasters think, we've done everything possible to improve odds. Both perspectives are true, neither is comforting. April 1944 brings the weight of mission reality. The 82nd's assignment is specific and vital. Secure the western flank of Utah Beach by capturing Sainte-Mère-Église and controlling causeways across flooded areas behind the beach. Without these causeways, forces landing at Utah Beach will be trapped on a narrow strip of sand, vulnerable to counterattack and unable to move inland. The mission is clear. The opposition, according to intelligence, is German 91st Air Landing Division and 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment. This creates the extraordinary scenario of American paratroopers fighting German paratroopers, experimental versus original, students versus teachers. The Germans pioneered airborne operations. German Fallschirmjäger are legendary, though they haven't conducted major airborne operations since Crete in 1941 due to catastrophic casualties. The matchup carries symbolic weight beyond tactical significance. Can Americans match the troops who invented the concept? Training fatalities accumulate with grim regularity. 63 men die in preparation for Normandy parachute malfunctions, landing injuries, accidents with explosives and weapons. These deaths are classified, kept secret to maintain morale. Families receive telegrams expressing regret for training accidents, careful wording that reveals nothing about the scale or frequency. The survivors conduct memorial services privately and continue training the next day. Each death reinforces the stakes. Men are dying in safe England doing practice jumps. What will combat jumps in occupied France look like? The mathematics are simple and terrible. If training kills 63 men out of 11,000 in 6 months, combat operations will kill far more in far less time. Everyone knows this. Nobody speaks it aloud. Speaking it aloud would make the fear real instead of managed. May 27th, 1944, Spanow Airfield. General Dwight Eisenhower visits the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment for a pre-invasion inspection and speech. The paratroopers expect a formal address, prepared remarks, propaganda. Instead, Eisenhower speaks directly and personally. He tells them he needs them desperately. He says he is confident they will do the job. Then he moves among them, shaking hands, asking where they're from, what they did before the war, treating them like individuals rather than units. The effect is profound. Eisenhower, who carries the weight of the entire invasion, takes time to connect with individual soldiers. The message is clear. You matter, each of you, personally. The paratroopers who will jump into Normandy in 8 days feel seen, valued, important. This emotional connection is more effective than any tactical briefing. They'll fight for each other, for their units, but also for the man who took time to shake their hands and look them in the eyes. The psychological burden of being the spearhead is immense and unspoken. Paratroopers will land in Normandy before anyone else. They'll be behind enemy lines before dawn, while the rest of the invasion force is still loading into landing craft in England. If they fail, if they don't secure those causeways and crossroads, the entire invasion could collapse before beach landings even begin. This responsibility sits heavy on every soldier. They're not just fighting for themselves or their units. They're fighting to make possible everything that comes after. The weight of this knowledge manifests in different ways. Some men become quieter, more focused. Others become louder, more reckless. Still others seem unchanged, but their hands shake slightly when they think nobody's watching. Fear and pride mix into something that keeps men functional when terror should paralyze them. By early June 1944, the 82nd Airborne Division is as prepared as training, equipment, and planning can make them. They've studied terrain models until they can navigate Normandy blindfolded. They've practiced jumps until procedures are automatic. They've learnt Sicily's lessons and integrated improvements. They carry better equipment, follow refined doctrine, and operate with realistic expectations about chaos. None of this changes the fundamental reality. They're going to jump out of aeroplanes at night over occupied France into German defences that intelligence has badly underestimated. They're going to land scattered, separated, confused, and immediately be in combat against an enemy that's been preparing for this invasion for years. All the training in the world can't change these facts. It can only prepare them to function anyway. And on June 5th, when they load into C-47s at air bases across southern England, they're as ready as anyone has ever been to do something that remains fundamentally insane, to deliberately jump into chaos and call it strategy. September 13th, 1943, Salerno beachhead, Italy. General Mark Clark's Fifth Army is being pushed back into the sea. German counterattacks have created a crisis so severe that Clark is making contingency plans for evacuation, an admission that the entire Italian invasion might collapse catastrophically. His forces are exhausted, ammunition is running low, and German pressure is increasing. Clark makes a desperate request. Airborne reinforcement drop directly onto the battlefield, something that's never been attempted before. Not behind enemy lines in a preliminary operation, but onto an active battlefield where friendly and enemy forces are mixed. The concept is tactically insane and operationally necessary. Without reinforcement, Salerno will become an Allied disaster comparable to Dunkirk. With reinforcement, the beachhead might hold. Clark's staff begins frantic planning for an operation that must execute in hours, not the months typically required for airborne operations. The 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment receives alert orders on September 13th, with execution planned for that same night. 1,300 men must prepare for a combat jump with 36 hours' notice. This timeline is absurd compared to Sicily's months of preparation. There are no detailed terrain models, no extensive briefings, no careful coordination. The plan is simple to the point of crude. Jump onto the beachhead, reinforce the line, prevent German breakthrough. Drop zones are marked by friendly forces using lights and coloured panels. The assumption is that Allied forces control the drop zones. This assumption is partially wrong. Parts of the planned drop zone are contested or under German observation, but there's no time for detailed reconnaissance. The 504th loads into C-47s, knowing they're jumping into an active battle with minimal planning. It's a calculated gamble born from desperation. Night of September 13th to 14th, 1943. 1,300 paratroopers exit aircraft over Salerno. The anti-aircraft fire is intense but less scattered than Sicily. The pilots, benefiting from Sicily's hard lessons, maintain formation better. The pathfinders, despite minimal setup time, mark zones adequately, and something remarkable happens. 95% of paratroopers land within 1 mile of intended drop zones. This accuracy is stunning compared to Sicily's catastrophic dispersion. The improvement reflects better pilot training, refined procedures, and favorable conditions, less wind, better visibility, shorter flight time from bases in Sicily. The paratroopers hit the ground, assemble rapidly, and move toward defensive positions. Many land so close to German forces that combat begins before parachutes can be completely gathered. This isn't the plan, but it's acceptable chaos rather than catastrophic chaos. September 14th, dawn. The paratroopers shore up collapsing defensive positions along a 7-mile section of perimeter. Mark Clark's conventional forces are stretched beyond breaking point. The arrival of fresh airborne troops, even in relatively small numbers, stabilizes the line psychologically as much as physically. German forces probing for weak points encounter unexpected resistance. The psychological impact mirrors Sicily. Germans don't know how many American paratroopers landed or where they all are. Each encounter with paratroopers creates uncertainty. Are these isolated groups or the edge of a major airborne operation? The Germans become cautious, methodical, giving Fifth Army time to reorganize. The 1,300 paratroopers from the first wave are performing the work of a much larger force simply by being unpredictable. September 15th brings the second wave. 2,100 additional paratroopers from the 504th drop into Salerno with even better accuracy than the first wave. The operation is now executing with precision that would have seemed impossible after Sicily. The drops are concentrated, units assemble quickly, and integration into defensive positions happens smoothly. This success reflects Sicily's learning curve compressed into incredible timeline. The same division that scattered across 60 miles in Sicily is now executing textbook jumps with minimal preparation time. The difference is experience, improved doctrine, and luck-favorable conditions that Sicily lacked. The combination creates an operation that looks effortless to observers but represents months of painful learning purchased with Sicilian blood. The fighting at Salerno is brutal but conventional. Paratroopers aren't conducting daring raids behind enemy lines. They're serving as infantry in a static defense. This isn't what airborne forces are designed for, but it's what the situation requires. The 504th holds its section of line against repeated German attacks. Casualties are 8% significant, but far lower than Sicily's losses. Most casualties come from direct combat rather than parachute injuries or friendly fire. This represents another improvement. The jump itself, which dominated Sicily casualties, is relatively clean at Salerno. The danger comes from ground combat, where paratroopers fight as skilled but conventionally employed infantry. They're not revolutionizing warfare. They're plugging a gap with competent soldiering. September 16th. German forces withdraw from Salerno. The beachhead is secure. Mark Clark's Fifth Army is safe. The crisis that threatened to destroy an entire invasion has been resolved, and remarkably, almost nobody will remember this. Salerno doesn't capture public imagination the way Sicily did or Normandy will. It's a competent, successful operation that happens to be completely overshadowed by larger events. The 504th executed a near-perfect airborne operation under absurdly compressed timeline and saved an entire army from potential disaster. History barely notices. There are no books titled The Forgotten Victory at Salerno or movies depicting this operation. It succeeds too efficiently to be dramatic, happens too early in Italy, campaigned to be decisive, and solves a crisis most people don't know existed. The tactical success of Salerno proves several critical points that don't receive adequate recognition. First, airborne operations can be planned and executed rapidly when necessary. The 36-hour timeline from alert to jump demonstrates flexibility that strategic planners hadn't considered. Second, improved training and doctrine work. The accuracy improvements over Sicily are dramatic and measurable. Third, even small numbers of well-trained paratroopers can have strategic impact when employed at the right place and time. 1,300 men didn't defeat the German forces threatening Salerno. They bought time for conventional forces to reorganize and counterattack. This economy of force, small elite units creating disproportionate effects, validates the airborne concept more convincingly than Sicily's chaotic success. Yet Salerno's lessons aren't fully absorbed into doctrine because the operation doesn't fit the narrative being constructed around airborne forces. Sicily is dramatic, scattered paratroopers achieving impossible objectives through individual heroism, despite catastrophic dispersion. That story sells newspapers, inspires troops, justifies the expense. Salerno is professional trained soldiers executing improved doctrine to solve a tactical problem. That story is boring. It suggests airborne forces are useful tools rather than war-winning wonders. The institutional pressure is toward the Sicily narrative, not the Salerno one. So Salerno gets filed away, acknowledged in after-action reports, forgotten in popular memory. The men who jumped into Salerno know what they accomplished. They don't need Hollywood to validate it. The 304th returns to base, having proven that American airborne forces have matured from experimental chaos in Sicily to professional competence in Salerno. This maturation happens in 2 months through brutal learning, doctrinal refinement, and simple repetition. The same pilots flying the same aircraft with the same equipment achieve dramatically different results because they've learned from failure. But this success creates a dangerous expectation that future operations will be similarly clean, that problems have been solved, that airborne operations are now reliable. This expectation is partially true and dangerously incomplete. Salerno worked because conditions were favorable, timeline compressed, and mission clearly defined. Normandy will be none of these things. The confidence built at Salerno will carry paratroopers through D-Day preparation. Whether that confidence is justified or delusional will be answered in Norman skies, where everything will go wrong again, but on a scale that makes Sicily look like a practice exercise. Salerno is the proof that lessons can be learned. Normandy will test whether learning is enough. RAF Medmenham, England, April 1944. Photo interpreters lean over aerial reconnaissance images of Normandy coastline, magnifying glasses in hand, cataloguing every detail. These men and women have been analysing photographs for months, building comprehensive understanding of German defences, unit positions, and obstacle placements. They're very good at their jobs. They can identify vehicle types from shadows, estimate troop strength from barrack size, and track defensive construction projects by comparing images taken weeks apart. But they're about to miss something catastrophic. In the photographs spread across their tables are signs of recent German reinforcements moving into precisely the areas where American paratroopers will drop. The interpreters don't see it, not because they're incompetent, but because the signs are subtle and the German units are deliberately concealing their presence. This oversight will cost hundreds of American lives. The intelligence briefing delivered to the 82nd Airborne in May 1944 is confident and wrong. Analysts project 1,500 German troops in the division's operational area, coastal defense units of limited capability, mostly static positions with poor mobility and questionable morale. Some units are categorized as Ost battalions, forced conscripts from Eastern Europe with minimal loyalty to Germany. The briefing suggests resistance will be sporadic and disorganized. Paratroopers should expect to overwhelm defensive positions quickly and secure objectives before significant counterattack develops. This assessment is based on photo intelligence, signal intercepts, and agent reports. All sources point to the same conclusion. Normandy's inland areas are lightly defended by second-rate troops. The analysis is rigorous, professional, and catastrophically incorrect. May 20th, 1944. What the intelligence analysts don't know, what their methods cannot detect, is that the German 91st Air Landing Division is moving into position in the exact area where the 82nd will drop. These are not coastal defense troops. They're combat veterans redeployed from the Eastern Front, soldiers who survived Stalingrad and the brutal fighting in Russia. They're equipped with MG-42, machine guns, mortars, and adequate artillery support. Their morale is not questionable. It's hardened by years of combat. Their capability is not limited, it's extensive and proven. And they're being positioned to defend against exactly the kind of airborne operation the Allies are planning. The German High Command, anticipating invasion, has reinforced Normandy with veteran units. This reinforcement happens in May, too late for intelligence estimates to be updated before D-Day preparation is finalized. June 3rd, 1944. The final intelligence update before D-Day still shows no major German units in the 82nd's drop zones. The photo interpreters have recent images. They see what's visible: static defenses, some troop movement, garrison activity. What they don't see is the full strength of forces that have moved into the area. The German 91st Division is dispersed and camouflaged. Units are billeted in small groups in farm buildings and forests, rather than concentrated in barracks that would show on aerial photography. Vehicle parks are concealed under trees. The Germans learned from Allied air superiority in Sicily and Italy that concentration creates vulnerability. Dispersion prevents effective bombing but makes forces invisible to photo reconnaissance. The intelligence failure isn't from lack of effort. It's from German deception working better than Allied detection. The terrain misunderstanding compounds the personnel misunderstanding. Intelligence identifies flooded areas behind Utah Beach that paratroopers must cross to secure causeways. The briefings describe these as swampy, difficult terrain. The reality is that Germans have deliberately flooded fields by breaking dikes and closing drainage systems. The water is 3 to 6 feet deep, in many areas not swamp but actual flooded fields. Paratroopers landing in these areas will drown if they can't release the heavy equipment quickly. The intelligence maps show flooding but don't convey depth or extent. Briefers describe obstacle, not death trap. This miscommunication will kill men who land in water over their heads, weighed down by 120 pounds of gear, unable to reach release mechanisms before their parachutes drag them under. The German 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment presents another intelligence gap. These are elite German paratroopers, the original practitioners of airborne warfare, positioned near Saint-Omer-Église. Intelligence identifies their presence but underestimates their strength and capability. The briefings acknowledge German paratroopers exist in the area but suggest they're undermanned remnants, unlikely to mount significant resistance. This assessment badly misjudges both numbers and quality. The 6th Fallschirmjäger, while not at full strength, remains a highly capable unit with soldiers who've trained specifically for the kind of fluid, chaotic combat that airborne operations create. The coming battle will be elite versus elite, with American paratroopers facing opponents who understand airborne tactics from the inside. Intelligence doesn't prepare the 82nd for this level of opposition. June 5th, 1944, evening, paratroopers load into C-47s carrying intelligence briefings that underestimate enemy strength by a factor of 5. They expect 1,500 German troops of questionable capability. They'll actually face more than 8,000 veterans with good equipment and strong defensive positions. This discrepancy is worse than Sicily, where intelligence was incomplete but not systematically wrong. The Normandy intelligence failure is comprehensive, wrong about troop strength, wrong about unit quality, wrong about terrain hazards. Whether this failure results from German deception, Allied analytical errors, or institutional pressure to provide optimistic assessments doesn't matter to the paratroopers boarding aircraft. They're going into battle expecting one scenario and will encounter something completely different. The question that haunts post-war analysis is whether commanders knew the intelligence was wrong and sent men anyway, or genuinely believed the assessments. Evidence suggests genuine belief mixed with acceptable uncertainty. All intelligence involves probability, not certainty. Commanders' new estimates might be imperfect, but had no reason to suspect they were fundamentally wrong. The photo analysts were competent professionals using state-of-the-art methods. The signals intelligence supported the photo assessment. Multiple independent sources agreed. That consensus was wrong, but it was honest wrong, not knowing deception. The failure is systemic, not individual. Intelligence collection methods effective against static defenses couldn't detect mobile, dispersed forces employing aggressive camouflage. The soldiers loading into aircraft don't debate intelligence methodology. They know briefings are estimates, not facts. They remember Sicily, where every briefing proved wrong the moment they landed. Some men trust the intelligence. Others ignore it entirely, assuming worst case regardless of what they're told. The veterans especially, men who jumped into Sicily and survived, approach briefings with profound skepticism born from experience. If you assume you'll land in the wrong place, facing more enemies than expected, with equipment that doesn't work, you won't be disappointed. This defensive pessimism is psychological armor against the shock of reality exceeding worst expectations. The intelligence failure means that shock is coming. The veterans' pessimism will be vindicated. The optimists who believe the briefings will learn the hard way that intelligence estimates and combat reality are different categories of truth, and only one of them shoots back. 1:15 in the morning, June 6th, 1944. 13,000 American paratroopers stand in aircraft doors over Normandy, waiting for green lights that will send them into history. Below, German anti-aircraft batteries open fire. Tracers arc through darkness like deadly fireworks. Flak bursts create orange blooms that rock the C-47s violently. Pilots break formation, taking evasive action to avoid being shot down. The careful approach patterns disintegrate immediately. Clouds obscure ground reference points. Jump lights illuminate anyway. Better to drop paratroopers in the wrong place than fly them into concentrated flak and lose everyone. The jump masters hand signal. The men shuffle forward. Exit. The door swallows them into darkness and chaos. This is it. Everything has been leading to this moment. All the training, all the preparation, all the promises about precision and planning gone the instant German gunners open fire. The dispersion is worse than Sicily. 60% of the 82nd lands outside assigned drop zones. Some men come down 35 miles from target. The causes are multiple and overlapping: evasive action scattering formations, clouds obscuring landmarks, German flak forcing early or late drops, high winds blowing men off course during descent. The result is thousands of American paratroopers scattered across the Normandy countryside with no idea where they are, where their units are, or what they're supposed to do next. Some land alone and spend hours trying to find anyone from their division. Others land in small groups of 3 to 5 men, nobody from the same squad or platoon. A few lucky units land in concentrated groups of 50 or more, still far below the hundreds intended, but enough to attempt missions. The majority land scattered, confused, and immediately in combat. 2:30 in the morning, Sainte-Mère-Église. Small groups from the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment converge on the town from multiple directions. They weren't planned to arrive this way. The operation called for concentrated assault from one direction, but the dispersion accidentally creates tactical advantage. Germans defending the town face attacks from unexpected angles. Every time they respond to gunfire from one direction, Americans appear from another. 180 paratroopers, less than a third of planned force, capture Sainte-Mère-Église before dawn. This becomes the first French town liberated from German occupation. The achievement is remarkable given the numbers involved. The survivors will later describe it as organized chaos, nobody following the plan, because nobody knew what the plan was anymore. Just groups of Americans independently deciding that the town needed to be taken and moving toward it from wherever they happened to land. 3 o'clock in the morning, locations throughout Cotentin Peninsula, lone paratroopers and tiny groups conduct guerrilla actions that no plan anticipated and no commander ordered. A 3-man team finds a German communications line and cuts it. Another group stumbles on a supply dump and destroys it with explosives meant for a different target. Individual soldiers set up roadblocks using mines they carried for other purposes. A lieutenant with 12 men ambushes a German truck convoy, creating the impression of a larger force. These actions are improvised, opportunistic, and cumulatively devastating. The Germans receive scattered reports of American forces everywhere, attacking everything with no apparent pattern. This creates the psychological impact that concentrated operations could never achieve, the sense that the entire region is infiltrated, that every road might hide an ambush, that communications can't be trusted because lines are cut, that supplies might be destroyed before reaching front lines. Dawn, Lafayette Causeway. 155 scattered paratroopers from multiple units assemble near a critical bridge across flooded areas. This bridge is essential. Without it, German armor can't counterattack the beaches, and American forces can't push inland. The paratroopers don't have enough men to properly defend the position. Doctrine calls for at least a battalion, 600 men. They have a quarter that number, but they're already there, the bridge is undefended, and German counterattack is inevitable. They take positions, dig in, and wait. The German counterattack comes with infantry and armor support. The math is brutal: 155 Americans against force strength that should overrun them in minutes. But the bridge is a choke point. German armor can't spread out or maneuver. The paratroopers have clear fields of fire. And most importantly, they're willing to die rather than withdraw. The position holds. For 3 days, this tiny force will hold Lafayette against regiment strength attacks, changing defensive positions constantly to create illusion of larger force, making Germans think they're facing entrenched battalion rather than scattered remnants. 10 o'clock in the morning, June 6th, Utah Beach landings begin. The 82nd's mission was to secure 4 causeways across flooded areas to allow beach forces to move inland. Despite catastrophic dispersion, despite having only 1/3 of expected manpower at most positions, all 4 causeways are secured by D+1. This achievement is statistically improbable. Scattered fragments of companies accomplish missions planned for full battalions. The explanation isn't superior planning or better equipment, it's individual initiative multiplied across thousands of soldiers who land alone or in small groups and decide to accomplish their missions anyway. No central coordination exists to create this outcome. It emerges from training that emphasized independent action, from competitive culture that makes failure unthinkable, and from simple bloody-minded refusal to accept that dispersion equals defeat. The casualty count tells competing stories. 1,259 killed, wounded, and missing in the first 24 hours. This is horrific, more than 10% of division strength gone in a day, but it's also lower than worse predictions. Sicily's casualty rate was higher relative to time in combat. The equipment works better, fewer men die from parachute malfunctions. The landing injuries, while significant, are less catastrophic than training suggested they might be. The highest casualties come from actual combat, which is perversely reassuring because it means men are living long enough to fight rather than dying from technical failures. The missing persons count is especially complex. Many missing soldiers are simply too scattered to report to any command element. They're alive, operating independently, and will eventually reconnect with units. Others are missing because they drowned in flooded fields, died in isolated firefights, or were captured. Sorting dead from scattered takes days. The objectives matrix reveals the paradox of D-Day for the 82nd. Tactically, the operation is a disaster, massive dispersion, unit cohesion destroyed, communications failed, equipment lost. Strategically, it's a success, all assigned objectives secured, beaches protected, German counterattacks delayed. This contradiction defies conventional military logic. Successful operations should have good tactics, producing good outcomes. D-Day shows terrible tactics, producing good outcomes through sheer will and improvisation. Colonel Gavin's after-action assessment captures this. Dispersion was so great that it worked to our advantage. The enemy never knew where we were or in what strength. This is not a doctrine to teach at military academies. It's an admission that success emerged from failure, so comprehensive it confused everyone equally. General Eisenhower reviews D-Day results with mixed emotions. The beach landings succeeded. The airborne operations achieved objectives. But the cost in men and the chaos of execution raised the same questions Sicily raised. Is this a sustainable model? The 82nd's performance proves that American paratroopers can accomplish missions despite catastrophic conditions. It doesn't prove that creating catastrophic conditions is a good strategy. The institutional debate about airborne operations continues, but with an important shift. Pre-D-Day debate centered on whether airborne operations could work. Post-D-Day debate centers on whether they're worth the cost. This is progress of a sort, moving from questioning viability to questioning efficiency. The 82nd has crossed from experimental to operational. They've proven paratroopers can fight. They haven't proven parachuting is the best way to get them into fights. That question remains unresolved as the division prepares for what comes next. The brutal attrition of Normandy hedgerow fighting that will test whether elite troops can survive being used as regular infantry in sustained combat they were never designed to endure. June 7th, 1944, Hill 30, Normandy. The 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment holds a position that shouldn't be defensible with the forces available. 200 men, scattered remnants from D-Day dispersion, occupy high ground surrounded by German forces. They're cut off, isolated, with no clear route to friendly lines and no immediate prospect of relief. For 3 days, this tiny force will hold against repeated German attacks while losing 60% of their strength to combat attrition. This is not the war paratroopers trained for. They train for rapid strikes, quick objectives, relief by conventional forces within hours. Instead, they're fighting static defense against superior numbers with dwindling ammunition and no resupply. The survivors will later describe those 3 days as worse than D-Day itself. At least the jump had adrenaline and movement. Hill 30 is just waiting to die slowly while Germans probe for weaknesses that absolutely exist but somehow don't break. The Normandy hedgerow terrain transforms warfare into something medieval and personal. Hedgerows are ancient earthbanks, 4 to 6 feet high, covered with thick vegetation, creating natural walls that divide the countryside into tiny fields. Each field becomes a separate battlefield. Soldiers can't see more than 50 yards in any direction. Artillery is less effective because fragments get absorbed by earthbanks. Tanks can't maneuver freely because hedgerows channel movement into predictable paths. Infantry combat degenerates into brutal, close-range engagements where the side that spots the enemy first usually wins. For paratroopers trained in mobile operations, this environment is a nightmare. Their advantages, speed, flexibility, surprise, mean nothing when every advance is measured in fields. Every field costs lives, and there are thousands of fields between current positions and objectives. June 12th, Lafayette Causeway assault. The 82nd has been holding the bridge for days. Now they're ordered to attack across it, seize the far side, expand the bridgehead. The causeway is 600 yards of open ground with flooded fields on both sides, a fatal funnel where concealment is impossible, and German defensive positions have clear fields of fire. The attack begins at dawn, Men advance across the causeway in small groups, trying to use what minimal cover exists. German machine guns open fire. The casualties are immediate and catastrophic. Men fall, others drag them back, more advance. The assault becomes a mathematics problem in blood. How many casualties can you sustain and still maintain forward momentum? The answer, discovered through experimentation measured in corpses, is roughly 50%. Beyond that threshold, units break psychologically. The Lafayette assault reaches that threshold and keeps going. 300 men become casualties in hours. The far side of the causeway is eventually secured, but the price is a casualty rate that would destroy regular infantry units' morale permanently. June 15th, Montaberg Station. The fighting here epitomizes hedgerow warfare at its worst. House-to-house combat in a small farming village. Every building must be cleared. Every hedgerow must be assaulted. The Germans defend each position until overrun, then fall back to the next hedgerow 50 yards away and do it again. There's no maneuver, no brilliant tactics, just brutal frontal assaults repeated endlessly. Paratroopers trained to think creatively, to improvise solutions, find themselves executing the same attack pattern dozens of times. Suppressive fire, small team advances, grenades into positions, close combat, secure position, take casualties, repeat. The only variable is which squad takes the casualties this time. Medics work continuously, overwhelmed by volume of wounded. The division aid stations fill beyond capacity. Casualties are evacuated to beach hospitals when transportation is available, which isn't often enough. June 20th brings the accounting that commanders didn't want to face. Division casualty count reaches 46%, 5,245 casualties from 11,770 starting strength. Almost half the division is gone in 2 weeks. This rate is unsustainable. Elite units can't be elite if they're constantly rebuilding with replacements. The institutional knowledge that makes units effective soldiers who know each other, officers who understand their men, established procedures and unspoken communication, evaporates when half the faces are new. Some companies are down to 30% strength. Battalions that should field 800 men are operating with 300. And the fighting continues. There's no pause for reconstitution, no withdrawal for refitting. The 82nd holds the line because there's nobody to replace them. The hedgerow fighting exposes the fundamental contradiction of elite airborne divisions. They're too valuable to waste on regular infantry missions, but too capable to pull from the line when regular infantry missions need doing. Commanders face impossible choices. Paratroopers are specially trained, expensively equipped, and psychologically conditioned for specific operations. Using them as line infantry wastes their specialized capabilities. But the front needs every capable unit, and the 82nd is extremely capable. So they stay in line, grinding forward field by field, suffering casualties that would be acceptable for regular infantry but are catastrophic for an elite division that can't easily replace losses with equally trained soldiers. The waste is apparent to everyone and changes nothing because operational necessity trumps efficient resource allocation. July 8th, 1944, the 82nd is finally pulled from the line after 33 consecutive days in contact. They're combat ineffective not because they're unwilling to fight, but because they literally don't have enough men to hold assigned sectors. The division that jumped into Normandy no longer exists in any meaningful sense. 54% of soldiers are replacements who arrived after D-Day. The 508th Regiment is reduced to 40% strength. Company-level leadership is devastated. Second and third lieutenants have average life expectancy measured in days, not weeks. Sergeants who normally lead squads are commanding platoons because all the officers are dead or wounded. The order to withdraw feels like salvation and admission of failure simultaneously. They accomplished every mission, but the cost makes victory taste like defeat. The replacement system compounds the problem. 2,500 non-airborne qualified soldiers are sent to fill the division's ranks. These are good infantry soldiers, competent and willing, but they haven't completed jump training. They haven't endured the selection process that creates airborne identity. They're called straight legs by the veterans, a derogatory term for non-paratroopers. The cultural integration is painful. Veterans resent replacements who wear the All-American patch without having jumped into Normandy. Replacements resent veterans who treat them as inferior despite both groups facing the same enemy bullets. This division between jumpers and non-jumpers creates exactly the cohesion problems commanders feared. The 82nd's identity as an elite airborne unit dilutes with every replacement who never jumped from an aircraft. The hedgerow casualties break down into categories that reveal warfare's brutal efficiency. Roughly 40% are wounded injuries serious enough to require evacuation, but not necessarily fatal. 20% are killed in action, death from enemy fire, before medical treatment could make a difference. 5% are missing men whose bodies aren't recovered, who are captured, or who simply vanish in the chaos. The remaining 35% are what the Army categorizes as non-battle casualties, injuries from accidents, illness, psychological breakdown, self-inflicted wounds. This last category is rarely discussed publicly. Some soldiers shoot themselves in the foot to escape combat, others simply stop functioning, their minds breaking under sustained stress. These aren't cowards. They're men pushed beyond human capacity to endure. The hedgerows don't just kill bodies, they destroy minds. The bitter lesson of Normandy's hedgerow fighting is that elite status doesn't make you bulletproof. Paratroopers die at the same rate as regular infantry in sustained combat because bullets don't care about jump wings or specialized training. The 82nd's advantage in mobile operations, independent action, and rapid decision-making means nothing in hedgerow warfare, where every attack is a frontal assault into prepared positions. The training that created elite soldiers prepared them for operations lasting hours or days. It didn't prepare them for weeks of continuous combat where exhaustion, ammunition shortages, and psychological fatigue matter more than tactical skill. By the time the division withdraws from Normandy, the survivors understand a truth that recruiting posters never mention. Elite units get the hardest missions, sustain the highest casualties, and receive the least rest because their capability makes them too valuable to spare. Being the best means being used until you break. The 82nd boards trucks and trains for England, carrying the knowledge that they'll be rebuilt and thrown back into combat before fully recovering. There's no institutional mechanism for saying this division needs 6 months to reconstitute properly. The war continues. Divisions fight until ineffective, withdraw briefly, receive replacements, and return to combat. The original members who jumped into Normandy look at the new faces filling the ranks and wonder what they're actually part of anymore. Is it still the 82nd if most of the 82nd is dead or wounded? Does elite status survive when training is compressed and standards are lowered to fill ranks quickly? These questions have no good answers. The division that leaves Normandy is both the same unit that jumped on D-Day and something entirely different, a ship of Theseus, where every plank has been replaced but the name remains unchanged. Eisenhower's headquarters, July 10th, 1944. Senior Allied commanders gather for a meeting that will determine the future of airborne operations. The Normandy results are in. D-Day achieved objectives despite massive dispersion. The subsequent hedgerow fighting cost the 82nd nearly half its strength in 33 days. Now comes the institutional reckoning. Were these results worth the investment? The room divides, predictably. Traditional infantry commanders see vindication of their skepticism, elite divisions suffering elite casualties to achieve results. Regular divisions eventually accomplish anyway. Airborne advocates like Ridgway argue the opposite. Paratroopers secured beaches, prevented counterattacks, and created psychological impact far exceeding their numbers. Both perspectives have merit. Both are incomplete. The debate isn't really about tactical effectiveness. It's about whether the American military can afford to maintain expensive, specialized divisions in a war requiring massive conventional forces. The statistical case against airborne divisions is compelling and brutal. Training costs 3 times more than regular infantry specialized schools. Jump training, equipment, and the 42% washout rate mean you're paying to train soldiers who never deploy. Casualty rates are double regular infantry in the first 48 hours of operations. The 82nd sustained 22% casualties in 2 days on D-Day, compared to 8% for amphibious assault forces over the same period. And for what? Every objective the paratroopers seized was eventually taken by conventional forces anyway. Omaha Beach, which had no airborne support, was secured by regular infantry, grinding forward through horrific casualties. The argument is that airborne operations are expensive, dangerous shortcuts that achieve temporary advantages at permanent cost in specially trained soldiers who can't be easily replaced. The counter-argument requires looking beyond simple mathematics to operational complexity. Yes, conventional forces eventually take the same objectives, but eventually matters in warfare. The causeways behind Utah Beach, secured by scattered paratroopers on D-Day, would have taken days for conventional forces to seize, fighting inland from the beaches. Those days would have cost thousands of additional casualties and potentially allowed German armour to counterattack before beachheads were established. The psychological impact on German forces, scattered reports of paratroopers everywhere, communications cut, supply lines threatened, created confusion that delayed and fragmented defensive responses. You can't measure this impact in territory seized or enemies killed. You measure it in battles that don't happen because the enemy is too disoriented to mount coordinated defense. This asymmetric value is real but impossible to quantify in after-action statistics. Winston Churchill poses the question that cuts through technical debate: are we creating elite soldiers or elite corpses? It's not rhetorical. British airborne forces suffered catastrophic casualties at Arnhem. American paratroopers are being ground down in hedgerows. German Fallschirmjäger, the original airborne troops, are now used exclusively as ground infantry because German High Command decided airborne operations aren't worth the casualties. Every nation that's experimented with paratroopers faces the same realization. Getting soldiers behind enemy lines is valuable, but parachutes are an expensive, dangerous delivery method that often fails catastrophically. Churchill's question implies its own answer. If elite training just creates soldiers who die faster in missions regular infantry could accomplish, the entire concept is institutional vanity rather than military necessity. The cost-benefit analysis becomes personal when translated from division-level statistics to individual soldiers. $8,500 to train an airborne soldier versus $2,900 for regular infantry. Is a paratrooper worth 3 regular infantrymen? In some scenarios, yes, the ability to seize strategic objectives before enemy reinforcements arrive justifies the investment. In others, no, using paratroopers as line infantry in hedgerow fighting wastes their specialized capabilities. The problem is that commanders can't know which scenario they're facing until operations begin. So the investment gets made, soldiers get trained, and their employment depends on battlefield conditions that are unpredictable. Sometimes the expensive tool is exactly right, sometimes it's catastrophically wrong. The inconsistency is maddening for planners who want clear doctrine and predictable outcomes. The German perspective offers cautionary lessons. After Crete in 1941, where German paratroopers suffered 35% casualties despite tactical victory, Hitler reportedly declared the day of the paratrooper is over. German airborne forces continued to exist but never conducted another major combat jump. They fought as elite ground infantry, essentially wasting their specialized training because the casualty rates of actual airborne operations were deemed unacceptable. The Americans studying this see 2 possible lessons. Either the Germans got it right and airborne operations are obsolete after one horrific experience, or the Germans gave up too quickly and abandoned a valuable capability because of one bad operation. The institutional pressure is toward the second interpretation because too much has been invested in American airborne divisions to abandon the concept without exhausting every possibility. Eisenhower tables the decision to abolish airborne divisions, but with significant caveats. Future operations must use airborne forces more selectively, no more extended ground combat where specialized training provides no advantage, better intelligence before operations to avoid dropping on unexpectedly strong positions, improved coordination to prevent friendly fire disasters like Sicily. These requirements sound reasonable in conference rooms. They're nearly impossible to guarantee in actual operations where intelligence is always incomplete, coordination breaks down under stress, and mission requirements evolve unpredictably. The decision not to abolish airborne divisions is less an endorsement of the concept than an unwillingness to admit the investment was wrong. The sunk cost fallacy operates at institutional scale. Too much has been spent training these divisions to cancel them without one more chance to prove their value. The 82nd soldiers don't participate in this debate. They're in England, receiving replacements, retraining, processing trauma that has no name yet because post-traumatic stress disorder won't be officially recognized for decades. They know abstractly that their future depends on generals deciding whether paratroopers are worth the cost. They don't know those deliberations nearly end the airborne program entirely. What they know is simpler and more immediate. They're still alive when many aren't. They're still part of the division when many have been replaced. And they'll jump again because that's what paratroopers do. The institutional debate about strategic value means nothing to soldiers whose value is measured in survival rates and mission completion. They were given impossible tasks. They accomplished them, Whether that justifies the concept of airborne operations is a question for people who don't jump from airplanes. The meeting concludes with compromise that satisfies nobody completely. Airborne divisions continue, their employment will be more restricted, the doctrine will be refined. These vague commitments kick the fundamental questions down the road. The next major airborne operation, Market Garden, will force those questions back to the surface with even more urgency, because that operation will demonstrate that perfect tactical execution by paratroopers can't overcome strategic stupidity by conventional commanders. But in July 1944, that disaster is still months away. The 82nd has survived D-Day, survived the hedgerows, and survived the institutional debate about whether they should exist. The division rebuilds in English camps, trains replacements, and waits for the next mission that will either validate the sacrifices already made or prove that Churchill was right. And elite training just creates elite corpses. Nottingham area, England, July 13th, 1944. The 82nd Airborne Division arrives from Normandy, and the contrast is jarring. England is peaceful, green, untouched by the fighting that just consumed 5,245 American lives in 33 days. Civilians go about normal routines, shopping, working, complaining about rationing. The paratroopers returning from France move through this normalcy like ghosts, unable to reconcile the tranquil English countryside with the memories of hedgerows and casualties and friends who aren't coming back. The division is assigned rest and reconstitution. Rest is possible. Reconstitution is a bureaucratic euphemism for replacing the dead and wounded with soldiers who never jumped into Normandy, never knew the men they're replacing, and will carry the weight of joining a legend they'll never fully belong to. The casualty mathematics require immediate action. 46% losses mean the division needs 3,200 replacement soldiers to reach authorized strength. These replacements arrive in waves throughout July and August, creating immediate cultural friction. Only 40% are airborne qualified, they've completed jump training and earned their wings. The other 60% are regular infantry soldiers transferred from other units, given abbreviated orientation, and assigned to airborne companies despite never having jumped from an aircraft. The Army's logic is practical. Trained infantrymen can fight effectively in ground combat regardless of how they arrived at the battlefield. The veterans' logic is tribal. You're not really 82nd unless you jumped into combat. This divide creates exactly the cohesion problems commanders feared. The compressed training for replacements reveals how desperate the situation has become. Normally, airborne qualification requires 4 weeks of training and 5 qualifying jumps. Replacements headed for the 82nd get 10 days and 3 jumps if they're lucky. The standards haven't changed officially. The enforcement has changed enormously. Men who would have washed out in earlier training cycles are pushed through because the division needs bodies. Instructors who would have failed candidates for inadequate performance pass them anyway because there's no time for second chances. The result is soldiers wearing jump wings who aren't as thoroughly prepared as the men they're replacing. Everyone knows this. Nobody discusses it openly. The fiction that standards remain unchanged is maintained because acknowledging the truth would mean admitting the division is degrading in quality as it reconstitutes in quantity. The veteran survivors process trauma through mechanisms that won't be formally understood for decades. Some drink heavily, using alcohol to numb memories of watching friends die. Others become withdrawn, emotionally flat, unable to connect even with fellow survivors. Still others seem outwardly fine but wake screaming from nightmares, or freeze when hearing sounds that resemble incoming artillery. The division has medics and doctors who treat physical wounds competently. They have no framework for treating psychological wounds that are just as real and just as debilitating. The term shell shock exists from World War I. The symptoms are recognized. The treatment is usually pull yourself together or being quietly reassigned to non-combat duties if the breakdown is severe enough to make a soldier obviously unreliable under fire. August 1944. The demographic profile of the division has shifted dramatically. The average age drops from 24.1 to 22.3 years. This seems like a small change, but reflects significant compositional shift. The older, more experienced soldiers who provided leadership and steadiness in combat are disproportionately casualties. The replacements are younger, less mature, less likely to have the judgment that comes from age and experience. Junior officers especially are very young second lieutenants in their early 20s, leading platoons into combat. The life expectancy of a second lieutenant in infantry combat is measured in weeks. Company commanders are usually first lieutenants or captains in their mid-20s, ancient by the standards of their men, but young by any normal measure. The 82nd is becoming a division of young men, led by slightly older young men, all carrying responsibility far beyond what their ages would suggest in peacetime. The integration of leg replacement soldiers who never completed jump training creates linguistic and social divisions. Veterans use leg as a derogatory term for non-airborne soldiers. The replacements who are legs know they're considered inferior, despite having the same combat training as airborne infantry. Some leg replacements work aggressively to prove themselves, volunteering for dangerous assignments, trying to earn respect through performance. Others become defensive or resentful, creating cliques of non-jumpers within airborne units. The officers try to bridge these divisions by emphasizing that everyone fights together, regardless of how they arrived. The reality is messier. Trust in combat comes from shared experience. Replacements haven't shared the Normandy experience. They're outsiders joining a tribal group that's defined by exclusivity. Time and shared combat will eventually integrate them or kill them before integration matters. September 10th, 1944, orders arrive for Market Garden. The division has been in England for 58 days. Doctrine suggests combat units need 90 days minimum to fully reconstitute after sustaining 40+% casualties. The 82nd gets 2/3 that time. The orders are classified, but even without details, the soldiers know what's coming. You don't frantically train and integrate replacements unless another combat operation is imminent. The veterans who survived Normandy feel a familiar dread mixed with resignation. They'll do it again, because that's what they do. The replacements feel a mixture of fear and excitement. Finally, they'll see combat, prove themselves, become real members of the division, rather than outsiders wearing the patch. Neither group knows they're about to participate in an operation that will execute almost perfectly and fail catastrophically anyway. The morale paradox of the 82nd in England is that unit pride remains extremely high, while individual confidence in survival is extremely low. Soldiers are proud to be part of the division, proud of what they accomplished in Normandy, proud of the All-American patch and the jump wings and the combat decorations. But individually, most veterans don't expect to survive the war. The mathematics are simple. If your division sustains 46% casualties in 1 month of combat, and the war might last another year or more, survival becomes statistically improbable. This creates a fatalism that looks like courage, but is actually the psychological defense of accepting death as likely. If you're probably going to die, fear of death becomes pointless. You might as well accomplish something worthwhile before it happens. This mindset makes soldiers tactically effective and psychologically damaged in ways that won't be fully apparent until after the war ends. The only veterans still with the division who jumped into Normandy are 6,525 men out of authorized strength of 11,770. This means 55% of the division boarding planes for Market Garden didn't jump on D-Day. More than half are new. The institutional memory, the shared experience, the unspoken understanding that comes from going through horror together, these exist among only a minority of the division. The 82nd is simultaneously the same unit that jumped into Normandy and something fundamentally different. The name continues. The shoulder patch remains unchanged. But the human composition has transformed so thoroughly that claiming continuity requires overlooking the reality that most of the people are different people. This is the ship of Theseus problem at division scale, and there's no satisfying philosophical answer. The 82nd is whatever the soldiers currently wearing the patch make it. Whether that's enough to maintain elite status when most soldiers are replacements with abbreviated training will be tested in Holland, whether bridges and objectives will demand everything the division has and possibly more than they can give. September 17th, 1944, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the largest airborne operation in history unfolds over Holland. 35,000 Allied paratroopers, American, British, Polish, drop in broad daylight to seize bridges across multiple rivers, creating a corridor for armoured advance into Germany. The 82nd's mission is to secure bridges at Grave and Nijmegen, particularly the massive road bridge across the Waal River at Nijmegen. The drop is beautiful, perfect weather, minimal anti-aircraft fire, excellent visibility. 85% of the 82nd lands within assigned drop zones, the best accuracy of the war. Everything Sicily's chaos wasn't, Market Garden is. The planes arrive on schedule, the Pathfinders mark zones perfectly, units assemble rapidly. For once, execution matches the plan. The paratroopers seize their initial objectives with minimal casualties. And then they wait for British tanks that are supposed to arrive in hours. and they keep waiting while the entire operation slowly strangles on a single highway too narrow for the traffic being forced through it. September 17th through 19th, the 82nd secures the Grave Bridge over the Mars River and the high ground around Grosbeak with textbook efficiency. These are critical objectives. If Germans retake the Grave Bridge, the entire Allied corridor collapses. The Grosbeak Heights overlook the area. German artillery positioned there could destroy the advance. The 82nd holds both. Every mission assigned is accomplished. But the Nijmegen Bridge, the largest and most important, remains in German hands because the division doesn't have enough strength to take all objectives simultaneously. Colonel Reuben Tucker's 504th Regiment is supposed to seize it, but gets diverted to reinforce defensive positions elsewhere. The bridge could have been taken easily on day 1 when it was lightly defended. By day 3, when the division finally has resources to attack it, the Germans have reinforced it heavily. The window of opportunity closes because British ground forces haven't advanced fast enough to link up and allow the 82nd to concentrate on the Nijmegen Bridge. September 20th, mid-afternoon. The Nijmegen Bridge assault becomes one of the most audacious actions in airborne history and one of the most poorly supported 26 canvas assault boats. 260 men of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, they're going to cross the Weil River in daylight under direct observation from German positions with minimal smokescreen and inadequate suppression fire. The boats are flimsy, designed for calm water, not river crossings under fire. Many soldiers can't swim. The plan is insane, but British tanks won't advance until the bridge is taken, and the bridge can't be taken from the Nijmegen side alone. Someone has to assault from the far side simultaneously. Tucker's paratroopers volunteer for the crossing because someone has to, and paratroopers don't wait for someone else to do impossible things. 3:28 p.m., September 20th, the assault boats enter the Weil River. German machine guns open fire immediately. The water erupts with impacts. Men paddle frantically with rifle butts and hands because half the boats don't have enough paddles. Soldiers are hit before reaching halfway across. Some boats sink, others drift off course. The ones that make it to the far bank disgorge men who immediately assault German positions with a fury born from surviving what should have been a massacre. The fighting is close and brutal. Paratroopers with rifles and grenades against entrenched Germans with machine guns in prepared positions. The Americans attack with such ferocity that German defenders, shocked that anyone survived the river crossing, begin surrendering or retreating. Within an hour, the far bank is secured. 48 men are dead. The bridge is still held by Germans on both ends, but now the attack can proceed from both sides simultaneously. Late afternoon, September 20th, American paratroopers hold the north end of Nijmegen Bridge. British tanks finally arrive from the south and begin crossing after American engineers clear German demolitions. The bridge is taken. Both road and rail bridges across the Waal are secured. The 82nd has accomplished every objective assigned, despite having to wait 3 days for British armour support. Colonel Tucker expects the tanks to immediately continue north toward Arnhem, where British 1st Airborne is being destroyed, trying to hold the bridge there. The entire operation depends on link-up happening within 3 days. It's now day 3. Arnhem is 9 miles north. The road is open. Tucker watches British tanks stop on the north side of the bridge and form defensive positions. Officers explain they're stopping for the night. It's getting dark. Continuing forward would be risky. Tucker reportedly stares in disbelief. His men just crossed a river in canvas boats in daylight under fire, and the tanks won't advance 9 miles in darkness. September 25th. British 1st Airborne Division at Arnhem is destroyed. Of 10,000 men dropped, only 2,400 escape. The rest are dead or captured. Market Garden fails catastrophically, not because airborne forces failed to achieve their objectives, but because British XXX Corps ground advance averaged 6 miles per day when it needed to maintain 15 miles per hour to reach Arnhem in time. The single highway assigned for the advance created bottlenecks where one destroyed tank or damaged bridge stopped the entire column. The 82nd held every objective for 60 days, not the 3-day operation planned, but 2 months of continuous defensive fighting. They secured the corridor, protected the bridges, and watched the operation collapse around them because ground forces couldn't move fast enough to exploit what paratroopers seized. The casualty count for Market Garden is 1,432, killed, wounded, and missing. This is lighter than Normandy, but still severe for what was supposed to be an easier operation. The Nijmegen crossing alone costs the 504th nearly 200 casualties, but the numbers don't capture the psychological impact of perfect execution producing strategic failure. The soldiers did everything asked. They jumped accurately, seized objectives, held against counterattacks, and conducted a river assault that military historians will study for generations. And it didn't matter. The operation failed anyway because someone else, British armour commanders, made decisions that doomed the entire enterprise. This creates a bitter lesson. Tactical brilliance can't overcome operational stupidity. You can do your job perfectly and still lose because someone else doesn't do theirs. The division remains in Holland holding the island, the area between the Rhine and Waal rivers, far longer than planned. 3 days becomes a week becomes 2 weeks, 2 weeks becomes 2 months. The temporary mission becomes semi-permanent occupation. The initial excitement of liberating Dutch civilians gives way to exhaustion from constant German probing attacks, artillery bombardment, and static warfare in conditions growing steadily worse as autumn turns toward winter. This isn't what airborne forces are designed for. Doctrine says use paratroopers for rapid strikes, then withdraw them for rest and refit. Reality says use them until they break because there aren't enough other units to relieve them. The 82nd is learning the same lesson they learned in Normandy hedgerows. Being elite means being overused, and overuse destroys what makes you elite. Market Garden becomes a case study in how operational success and strategic failure can coexist. The 82nd's after-action reports are filled with legitimate pride, best drop accuracy of the war, all objectives seized, bridges secured, corridor held for 60 days against sustained German counterattacks. But the operation these reports describe is technically a failure because Arnhem wasn't relieved and the Allied advance into Germany didn't happen. The contradiction is maddening. How do you process doing everything right and losing anyway? The answer is that soldiers don't process it. They file it away as another data point confirming that war is chaos, plans are fiction, and accomplishing your mission doesn't guarantee the mission matters. The 82nd did everything possible in Market Garden. They couldn't make British tanks drive faster or make the highway wide enough to prevent bottlenecks. Those failures weren't theirs, but they inherited the consequences. 2 more months of combat, 1,400 more casualties, and the knowledge that sometimes perfect isn't good enough. September 26, 1944. The island, the low-lying land between the Rhine and Waal rivers, becomes the 82nd's new home. They're told it will be temporary, a brief holding action until other units can relieve them. The division has already been in continuous combat since Market Garden's start on September 17th. A brief holding action sounds manageable. 2 weeks maximum, commanders estimate. The 82nd will eventually spend 60 consecutive days on the island, in conditions that make Normandy hedgerows look comfortable. This is the battle nobody remembers because it doesn't fit any narrative. It's not a heroic failure like Arnhem. It's not a dramatic success like D-Day. It's just grinding, miserable defensive warfare against constant German pressure in worsening weather with no clear end date and no recognition for the endurance required to survive it. The island's geography is a recipe for misery. 5 miles wide, 15 miles long, and most of it below river level. The Dutch had maintained dikes and drainage systems to keep it inhabitable. The Germans deliberately broke those systems, flooding fields, to create obstacles and deny movement. The water sits in low areas, 3 to 6 inches deep at the shallowest, up to 3 feet in some places. It's not deep enough to swim, but too deep to walk through easily with combat loads. And it's cold autumn in Holland, temperatures dropping toward freezing, constant rain, mud everywhere that water hasn't turned into shallow lakes. Soldiers live in this. They dig foxholes that fill with water immediately. They sleep in waterlogged trenches. They patrol through flooded fields. The conditions create non-combat casualties at rates that approach combat casualties, trench foot, exposure injuries, pneumonia, infections from constantly wet, skin breaking down. October 1st, German counterattacks begin in earnest. These aren't the massive assaults designed to break through and destroy the Allied corridor. They're probing attacks platoon to battalion, strength-testing defences, trying to identify weak points, keeping constant pressure on American positions. 37 separate counterattacks over the next 60 days, ranging from small squad infiltration attempts to coordinated multi-company assaults with armour support. None succeeds in breaking the American line, but each one costs casualties. Men are killed or wounded in firefights that don't even merit names because they're too small to be considered battles. They're just another Tuesday on the island, another squad fighting off Germans trying to take a crossroads or farmhouse or piece of high ground that only matters because it provides slightly better fields of fire. The artillery situation is particularly nightmarish. The island is flat, open, and within range of German artillery positioned on the high ground north of the Rhine. The Germans can observe American positions and direct, accurate fire. The 82nd has counter-battery artillery, but engaging in artillery duels just draws more fire. The result is that soldiers live under constant threat of random death from shelling. There's no warning, no defense, just sudden explosions that kill or maim whoever happens to be in the impact area. This creates a particular psychological stress different from infantry combat. In a firefight, you can shoot back, take cover, feel like you have some agency. Artillery just happens to you. You wait and hope the next shell lands somewhere else. After weeks of this, the psychological toll becomes severe. Men flinch at loud noises, dive for cover at sounds that don't actually indicate incoming rounds, develop nervous tics and stress responses that would be diagnosed as trauma if anyone was paying attention to mental health. October 15th brings another German counterattack, this one involving SS units attempting to cut the corridor. The assault is well coordinated, preceded by heavy artillery, supported by armour. The 82nd holds. Casualties are significant, but the line doesn't break. The after-action report files this as repelled enemy attack, using language that makes it sound routine. The soldiers involved will remember it as hours of sustained combat where survival was uncertainty and death was the probable outcome, prevented only by luck and the fact that Germans broke first. These divergent perspectives, official reports describing events clinically versus soldier experiences being existential crises, exist throughout the war. The reports serve institutional purposes. The experiences create trauma, both are true, neither is complete. November rolls in with worse weather and no relief in sight. The division has fired more artillery shells defending the island than during the entire Normandy campaign. This statistic appears in logistics reports as ammunition expenditure. It represents thousands of fire missions, each one directed at German positions, attacking or preparing to attack. The pace of combat isn't sustained, pitched battles. It's constant, low-intensity engagement punctuated by occasional high-intensity crises. This rhythm is exhausting in ways that short, violent combat isn't. Your body never fully relaxes. Sleep is always interrupted. You're never truly safe. The cumulative stress degrades combat effectiveness in ways that are hard to measure, but obvious to anyone paying attention. Men become slower to react, less alert, more prone to mistakes. Only the constant rotation of casualties and replacements prevents complete breakdown. There's always someone whose exhaustion hasn't yet reached the danger point. Medical statistics reveal the hidden cost of the island defense. 40% of the division receives treatment for trench foot or exposure-related injuries. Trench foot, caused by prolonged exposure to cold and wet, can require amputation if severe. Even moderate cases remove soldiers from combat for weeks. The medics work constantly treating conditions that wouldn't exist if soldiers had dry socks and warm places to sleep. But those luxuries don't exist on the island. Resupply is difficult because the single highway corridor is congested with traffic for the entire Allied front. Priority goes to ammunition and food. Dry socks are a luxury. So men's feet rot, skin breaks down, infections set in, and the division bleeds strength to non-combat injuries that are just as debilitating as wounds, but don't come with Purple Hearts or recognition. November 11th, 1944. The 82nd is finally relieved after 60 continuous days in combat. They're exhausted, under strength, and angry that nobody seems to recognize what they endured. Market Garden gets mentioned in newspapers, the heroic attempt to end the war by Christmas. That almost worked. The island defense gets nothing, no medals, no recognition, no acknowledgement that holding a flooded strip of land for 2 months against constant German pressure was a strategic necessity that prevented the entire Allied corridor from collapsing. The division moves to rest areas in France, carrying the bitter knowledge that history remembers dramatic failures and dramatic successes, but forgets competent endurance. They did their job so well that it looked easy, and because it looked easy, nobody noticed. The psychological impact of the island is deeper than the casualty count suggests. Normandy was terrible, but it had forward movement, the sense of accomplishing something, liberating France, driving toward Germany. The island was static, same positions, same enemy, Same miserable conditions day after day, with no sense of progress. The human mind needs purpose to endure suffering. The island offered survival as the only purpose. That's not enough. Soldiers need to believe their suffering serves a goal beyond mere existence. The island taught that sometimes you just endure because someone has to and there's nobody else. This lesson is psychologically corrosive. It strips away the narratives that make combat tolerable, that we're heroes, that we're winning, that this matters. The island said, "You're cold, wet, miserable bodies holding ground because ground must be held." There's no glory, no purpose beyond raw necessity. This truth, once learned, can't be unlearned. The soldiers leaving the island know they're expendable tools, wielded by command to solve problems. They'll keep fighting because that's their job, but the idealism that might have survived Normandy doesn't survive. The island's grinding nihilism. December 16th, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. German forces launched the largest offensive on the Western Front since D-Day, smashing through American lines with overwhelming force. 200,000 German soldiers supported by tanks and artillery attack across an 85-mile front. The offensive is complete. Surprise Allied intelligence completely missed the German build-up. American units holding the Ardennes are overrun, destroyed, or surrounded within hours. The entire Western Front is collapsing. Eisenhower's headquarters erupts in controlled panic. Every available unit is being rushed toward the breakthrough to establish new defensive lines before Germans reach the Meuse River and potentially drive all the way to Antwerp, cutting off entire Allied armies. And when commanders ask which units can move fastest and fight immediately upon arrival, the answer is airborne divisions. The 82nd, supposedly in rest after the island, receives emergency deployment orders December 17th evening. The 82nd loads into trucks in camps across France and begins road march toward Belgium. They've been out of combat for exactly 36 days, barely half the recommended 90-day rest period after sustained operations. The division is under strength, still integrating replacements from Market Garden and Island casualties, short on equipment because supply requisitions haven't been filled yet. None of this matters. The Western Front is collapsing and elite units don't get to choose when they're needed. The road march is chaos, hundreds of trucks moving through darkness, on roads clogged with retreating American units and Belgian refugees fleeing the German advance. The march proceeds through snow and sub-zero temperatures. Soldiers huddle in open trucks wearing whatever cold weather gear they could scrounge. Many don't have adequate winter uniforms because they weren't supposed to be in combat in December. Frostbite casualties begin before they reach the combat zone. December 20th, Werbermont, Belgium. The 82nd arrives after covering more than 100 miles in trucks over 3 days of continuous movement. They're combat ready 60 hours after receiving alert orders, far faster than the 5-day standard for regular infantry divisions. The speed comes from airborne organizational flexibility and the fact that paratroopers don't have heavy equipment to transport. They arrive light, which means mobile, which means they can respond to crises faster than mechanized units that need to move tanks and artillery. The division immediately inserts into the collapsing northern shoulder of the bulge, taking up defensive positions across approaches to critical road junctions. If Germans break through here, they reach open terrain and supply depots. The 82nd's mission is simple: hold against everything until reinforcements arrive. Duration unknown, support uncertain. Just hold. December 23rd through 26th, Chenaux, Belgium. The 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment counterattacks directly into the German spearhead. This is extraordinary. Most American units in the bulge are defending desperately or retreating. The 504th attacks. The decision reflects both tactical necessity and institutional character. German forces are probing for weak points in American lines. Aggressive counterattack prevents them from finding those weak points and creates uncertainty about American strength and dispositions. The fighting is brutal, close combat in sub-zero temperatures. Men freeze to death in foxholes when wounds prevent them from moving. Others suffer frostbite so severe that fingers and toes turn black and require amputation. The temperature is -10 to -20 Fahrenheit. Equipment malfunctions from cold. Weapons jam. Vehicles won't start. The human body isn't designed to function in these conditions while also conducting sustained combat operations. The division's defensive sector is 18 miles wide, 3 times what doctrine says a division should hold. This should be core responsibility, 3 divisions minimum. The 82nd holds it with 9,000 men, still under strength from Market Garden and the island. The mathematics are absurd. Company-sized elements are responsible for areas that should require battalions. Gaps in the line exist where there simply aren't enough soldiers to cover all terrain. The defence relies on mobile reserves, small groups that can rapidly respond to German breakthrough attempts and contain them until larger forces counterattack. It's desperate improvisation disguised as tactical doctrine, and it works barely because German attacks are fragmented and don't achieve the coordination needed to exploit the obvious gaps in American defences. January 3rd through 7th, 1945. The 82nd transitions from defence to offence, spearheading the Allied counterattack into the Bulge. This mission is even more demanding than defence attacking in winter through heavily forested terrain against German forces that have had weeks to prepare positions. The division advances methodically, clearing forests, seizing road junctions, forcing Germans back toward their start lines. The casualties are steady and relentless. 1,515 killed, wounded, and missing over 23 days of Bulge fighting. This casualty rate is actually lower than Normandy or Market Garden, but the conditions make it feel worse. Men die from exposure as often as enemy fire. Wounded soldiers who might survive in normal conditions freeze to death before medics can reach them. The cold is an additional enemy that kills indiscriminately and can't be fought. The 82nd's performance in the Bulge cements its reputation as the go-to crisis unit for the entire European theatre. When the front collapses, call the 82nd. When nobody else can move fast enough, call the 82nd. When the mission is impossible, call the 82nd. This reputation is both honour and curse. It means the division is considered supremely capable by high command. It also means they never get real rest because every crisis demands their deployment. Regular infantry divisions rotate through combat and rest in predictable patterns. Elite divisions get used continuously because their capability makes them too valuable to spare. The soldiers understand this dynamic and resent it even while taking pride in being essential. They're victims of their own effectiveness, so good at solving problems that they're given every problem until they break. The question nobody in command seems to ask is, how many times can you deploy a division in 6 months before it stops being the same division? The 82nd jumped into Normandy in June, fought through hedgerows until July, jumped into Market Garden in September, defended the island until November, and now is fighting in the Bulge in December through January. 6 months, 5 major operations, continuous combat with minimal rest between deployments. The personnel turnover is staggering. By the Bulge, only a small minority of soldiers were present for D-Day. The division has essentially replaced itself through casualties and rotations. What makes it still the 82nd when most of the people are different people? The answer is institutional culture, transmitted from veterans to replacements, carrying forward the expectation of excellence even as individuals come and go. But culture can only compensate for personnel turnover up to a point. Beyond that point, elite units become regular units with elite reputations that no longer match reality. The Bulge fighting reveals that the 82nd isn't elite because of special equipment or unique doctrine. Those advantages have long since been negated by casualties and attrition. They're elite because they've internalized expectations so high that failure is unthinkable. When told to hold 18 miles of front with inadequate forces, they don't argue about impossibility, they figure out how to do it anyway. When ordered to counterattack in sub-zero temperatures, they don't request better conditions, they attack. This psychological conditioning, hammered in through training and reinforced through combat experience, is what separates elite from regular. Regular units can be brave, competent, effective. Elite units do the impossible repeatedly until the impossible becomes expected. The cost is measured in casualties, exhaustion, and the certain knowledge that next crisis will demand deployment again, because elite units don't get to rest while there are still problems that need solving. The 82nd survives the Bulge. They don't get to enjoy survival because the war continues and they're already too valuable to spare. February 1945. The Rhineland, the 82nd Airborne Division, advances through Germany as conventional infantry, no longer the airborne spearhead, but just another division grinding forward in the final push toward Berlin. The irony is bitter and unavoidable. They spent a year proving that airborne operations could work, conducting 4 combat jumps, validating the doctrine with blood. Now, in the war's final months, they march on foot while other divisions get the glory of the last great airborne operation. March 24th, Operation Varsity, the Rhine River crossing, becomes the largest single-day airborne operation in history. 16,000 paratroopers and glider troops drop on the east bank of the Rhine to secure crossing sites for Montgomery's 21st Army Group. The 82nd watches from the ground, having crossed the Rhine by bridge hours earlier like regular infantry. They're spectators to an operation they should be leading. Command's reasoning is practical. The 82nd is too depleted, too worn down from continuous combat to conduct another airborne assault. The 17th Airborne Division, fresher and closer to full strength, gets the mission. Practical reasoning doesn't make watching easier. The soldiers' reactions to being excluded from varsity split along predictable lines. Veterans who jumped into Normandy and Market Garden feel relief mixed with resentment. Relief because they've done enough jumping into combat to last a lifetime. The memory of friends dying in parachute malfunctions, or drowning in flooded fields, or getting shot while helpless in harnesses is too fresh. Resentment because being sidelined suggests they're no longer capable, that the 82nd has been used up and discarded. The replacements who joined after D-Day feel cheated. Many completed airborne training specifically to be part of combat jumps. Now they're in an airborne division that isn't jumping anymore. They'll finish the war never having done the thing that defines paratroopers. Their jump wings are technically earned but feel hollow without combat validation. The advance through the Rhineland is methodical and grinding, town after town, each requiring house-to-house clearing. German resistance is collapsing but remains dangerous, isolated units still fighting, SS troops refusing to surrender, improvised defensive positions that cost American lives to overcome. The 82nd's mission is the same as every other Allied division. Advance, secure objectives, eliminate resistance, repeat. There's no special employment of airborne capabilities because the front has moved beyond the operational depth where airborne forces provide unique advantage. You can't drop paratroopers behind enemy lines when the enemy lines are fragmenting and retreating. The division that was designed for rapid deep strikes is being used for slow, shallow advances because that's what the operational situation requires. April 2nd, 1945. Cologne, Germany. The division enters one of Germany's major cities through methodical urban combat. This is the warfare of room clearing and street fighting, grenades through windows and bullets into doorways, checking every building for holdouts. It's tedious, dangerous work that infantry has been doing since cities existed. Nothing about it requires specialized airborne training. A paratrooper clearing a room has no advantage over regular infantry clearing the same room. The skills that made the 82nd valuable independent operation behind enemy lines, rapid seizure of strategic objectives, creating chaos in enemy rear areas mean nothing in urban combat where every block is contested and the front line is wherever the shooting is happening. The division is competent at this work. They're not uniquely suited for it. They're just well-trained soldiers doing infantry missions that any well-trained division could accomplish. The casualties in the final campaign are lighter than earlier operations, 879 killed, wounded, and missing from February through May. This reflects collapsing German resistance more than reduced combat intensity. German units are surrendering or retreating rather than defending to the last man. The Wehrmacht is disintegrating as an organized force. Individual battles remain violent, but the systemic threat of coordinated German defense is gone. The 82nd is fighting the endgame, cleaning up pockets of resistance that can still kill you but can't change the war's outcome. There's a particular psychological emptiness to dying in a war everyone knows is ending. The mathematics of acceptable casualties become obscene when victory is certain, is taking one more German city worth 10 American lives when the war might end next week anyway. Command says yes because objectives must be secured regardless of timeline. Soldiers calculate differently. April 20th. The division reaches the Elbe River, the pre-arranged demarcation line where American and Soviet forces will link up. They're ordered to hold the line and advance no further. Berlin lies less than 60 miles east. The 82nd could continue, but political decisions at the highest levels have determined that Berlin belongs to the Soviets. The soldiers don't understand why they're stopping. They've fought across France, through Belgium, into Germany, all the way to the Elbe, and now they wait while someone else takes the capital. The frustration is palpable and pointless. Strategic decisions aren't made by paratroopers, and explaining geopolitics to exhausted soldiers who've been in combat for 11 months is an exercise in futility. They hold the line because those are the orders. Purpose and meaning are luxuries that disappeared somewhere between Normandy and here. May 2nd, 1945. German forces in the 82nd sector surrender. The war in Europe is ending. Small unit actions continue for days as isolated German elements either surrender or are destroyed, but organized resistance has collapsed. The soldiers process victory with muted emotions. There's relief that they survived, grief for everyone who didn't, and a profound exhaustion that goes beyond physical tiredness into something existential. They've been at war for 11 months of continuous deployment, longer if you count training. The division that jumped into Normandy no longer exists in any meaningful sense. 22% are original members present since before D-Day. 78% are replacements who arrived at various points after June 6, 1944. The 82nd survived the war by becoming something different than it was, replacing itself entirely while maintaining the name and the mission. The final accounting reveals the transformation. The division deployed to Normandy with 11,770 soldiers. Over the next 11 months, it sustained 10,664 total casualties, 1,619 killed in action, 6,560 wounded in action, 2,485 missing in action. Total casualties exceeded starting strength. This is only possible because of continuous replacement. Soldiers killed or wounded were replaced by new soldiers who then became casualties themselves and were replaced again. The mathematical result is that the division that exists in May 1945 is almost entirely different people than the division that existed in June 1944. Some individuals persisted through the entire campaign, but they're statistical outliers, not the norm. The operational tempo explains the casualty numbers. 422 combat days, the most of any American division in the European theatre. D-Day and Normandy, hedgerows, 63 days, Market Garden and the island, 73 days. 23 days. Rhine campaign, 60 days. These major operations, plus smaller engagements, transportation time, and brief rest periods, add up to nearly continuous deployment. Regular infantry divisions rotated through combat and rest in patterns designed to prevent complete breakdown. The 82nd got used continuously because they were effective continuously, and effectiveness created demand for their deployment. The cycle was self-perpetuating and self-destructive. Success created more missions created more casualties required more replacements degraded the specialized capability that made the division successful in the first place. The question that nobody in command seems willing to answer directly is whether the 82nd's combat record validates the airborne concept or demonstrates its limitations. 4 combat jumps in 11 months, Sicily, Salerno, Normandy, Market Garden. The rest of their combat time was spent as conventional infantry. 85% of combat days involved fighting on the ground in missions that didn't require airborne delivery. The statistical conclusion is unavoidable. Airborne divisions spent most of their time doing things regular infantry could do. The specialized training, equipment, and expense that made them airborne was relevant for 15% of their deployment. The other 85%, they were just well-trained infantry who happened to have jump wings and a distinctive shoulder patch. This doesn't diminish their accomplishments. They were extremely effective infantry. It does raise questions about whether creating specialized airborne divisions was more efficient than creating additional regular infantry divisions with comparable training budgets. The soldiers crossing Germany in the war's final weeks don't debate institutional efficiency. They know what they've endured and what it cost. They know most of them shouldn't have survived the statistics, but did anyway through luck, skill, and the deaths of soldiers who replaced them who weren't as lucky. They know the division accomplished every mission assigned despite catastrophic casualties, impossible conditions, and employment that often wasted their specialized capabilities. They know they're part of something that history will remember, even if history remembers a simplified version that doesn't capture the complexity of continuous replacement and degraded capability and missions that had nothing to do with jumping from airplanes. The 82nd Airborne Division finished World War II as one of the most decorated and effective American units in Europe. They also finished it having proven that elite status is temporary, that continuous combat destroys even the best units through attrition, and that sometimes being the best just means you get used until you're broken and then use some more until the war finally ends and you can stop pretending that any of it made sense. May 1945. Germany. Victory in Europe. The 82nd Airborne Division assembles for final formation and the commanders realize they're looking at strangers. 78% of the faces are unfamiliar replacements who joined after D-Day, after Market Garden, after the island, after the bulge. Only 22% were present at the beginning. This is the mathematical endpoint of sustained combat. Complete personnel replacement masked by organizational continuity. The unit survived by consuming soldiers, processing them through combat until they were casualties, replacing them with new soldiers, and repeating the cycle. The 82nd that exists at war's end is technically the same division that jumped into Normandy, but functionally is something entirely different, a collection of individuals who share a name and patch but not the experiences that forged the original unit's identity. The statistical accounting tells a story of institutional endurance through human expenditure. 10,664 total casualties from a division that never exceeded 13,000 authorized strength, 1,619 killed in action, 6,560 wounded in action, 2,485 missing in action, many of whom were eventually confirmed killed or died in captivity, 422 combat days, more than any other American division in the European theatre. These numbers appear in official histories as evidence of the division's commitment and capability. They're also evidence of a system that used elite units until they broke and then rebuilt them just enough to use them again. The question nobody asks in official histories is, at what point does a division cease being the division it was and become just a designation applied to whoever's currently filling the ranks? 1946, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The division returns to the United States, and the original members who survived begin mustering out. Most don't stay in the army. They've done their service, survived when many didn't, and want to return to civilian life. The division that deployed to war dismantles through individual decisions to leave. Within months, almost none of the D-Day veterans remain. New soldiers arrive to fill the positions. The 82nd Airborne continues as an active duty division, maintaining the lineage and traditions, but the human continuity breaks completely. The men who jumped into Normandy scatter across America, carrying private memories of experiences they'll spend decades trying to process and rarely discuss with anyone who wasn't there. The reunion phenomenon begins in the 1970s and 80s when enough time has passed that survivors can talk about the war without it overwhelming them. Men who served in the same division, sometimes the same regiment, meet for the first time at these reunions because casualties and replacements meant they were never actually in the unit simultaneously. A soldier who jumped on D-Day and was wounded in July meets a soldier who joined in August and fought through Market Garden. Technically, they're both 82nd Airborne veterans. Actually, they served in the same unit at different times and have completely different war experiences. The reunions reveal the replacement reality, the continuity everyone assumed was actually continuous personnel churn, where individual soldiers cycled through the same organizational designation without overlapping. Military historians begin serious analysis of airborne operations effectiveness in the decades after the war. The consensus is complicated and unsatisfying to anyone looking for simple answers. Airborne operations worked, objectives were seized, strategic impact was achieved, tactical surprise was created. Airborne operations were also catastrophically expensive, casualties rates double, conventional infantry training costs triple, specialized equipment requirements created logistical burdens. The cost-benefit calculation depends entirely on what you're measuring. If you measure objectives seized per soldier deployed, airborne operations look efficient. If you measure objectives seized per dollar spent or per casualty sustained, they look wasteful. Both measurements are valid. Neither captures the full complexity. The specific legacy of the 82nd's World War II combat record is that they proved sustained airborne operations were survivable but barely. 4 combat jumps, all achieving objectives, all sustaining heavy casualties. The longest operation, Market Garden and the Island, lasted 73 days and cost thousands of casualties, while proving that airborne divisions could function as conventional infantry when necessary. The question was whether when necessary should be standard employment or emergency exception. Post-war doctrine settled on exception airborne divisions as specialized tools for specific missions, not general-purpose infantry, despite their capability to function as such. This conclusion emerged directly from the 82nd's experience being used as general-purpose infantry and suffering catastrophic attrition that nearly destroyed the division's specialized capability. The awards and recognition tell part of the story. 2 Medal of Honor recipients, both posthumous Private First Class Charles de Glopper, who sacrificed himself providing covering fire during a Market Garden assault, and Private John Towle, who single-handedly destroyed German positions during the Bulge before being killed. 48 Distinguished Service Crosses, thousands of Silver Stars, Bronze Stars, and Purple Hearts. The decorations represent individual acts of heroism extracted from 11 months of continuous combat, where heroism was so common it became statistically normal. When 50% of your division becomes casualties, when you're in combat 422 days, when every operation involves impossible odds and inadequate support, heroism stops being exceptional and becomes the minimum standard for survival. The comparative analysis with regular infantry divisions is revealing and uncomfortable. The 82nd sustained higher casualties and achieved similar territorial gains as conventional divisions operating in the same sectors. Their specialized training didn't make them bulletproof. Their airborne capability was relevant for 15% of combat days. The other 85%, they fought as infantry in missions that didn't require airborne delivery. So was the investment worth it? The 82nd could accomplish missions faster than regular infantry causeways seized on D-Day in hours rather than days, bridges taken in Market Garden before defenders could destroy them. Speed has value in warfare that casualty counts don't capture. Sometimes seizing an objective 6 hours faster changes strategic outcomes, even if the casualty cost is higher. But sometimes it doesn't, and elite soldiers die accomplishing in hours what regular soldiers would accomplish in days, and the 6-hour advantage doesn't matter strategically. The definitive question emerges from every analysis. Would 13,000 regular infantry soldiers with triple the training budget have been more effective than the 82nd Airborne Division? The question is unanswerable because we can't rerun the war with different force structures, but the logic is sound. For the cost of training, equipping, and sustaining one airborne division, you could field and support multiple regular infantry divisions. Those divisions would sustain lower casualty rates, require less specialized equipment, and could accomplish most of the same missions over slightly longer timelines. The premium you're paying for airborne capability is expensive in money and blood, and that premium only delivers value when speed of objective seizure is strategically critical. How often is that actually true? Sicily, maybe. Normandy, yes. Market Garden, yes. But the operation failed strategically anyway. The Bulge, no. They fought as infantry. The Rhine campaign, no conventional employment throughout. The human cost calculation is where the institutional logic breaks down completely. 82% personnel turnover means the division was destroyed and rebuilt through casualties. The men who died in June 44 were replaced by men who died in September, who were replaced by men who died in December. Each wave of replacements was slightly less prepared than the previous one because training timelines compressed to fill urgent needs. By war's end, the division was maintaining elite reputation through institutional inertia, while actual capability had degraded significantly from the peak. This degradation was inevitable given casualty rates and replacement timelines. No organization can sustain 82% turnover in 11 months and maintain original capability. The 82nd remained effective because, even degraded, they were better than many regular infantry divisions. But they weren't better than they were on D-Day. They couldn't be. Too many original soldiers were dead. The legacy the 82nd Airborne Division carried out of World War II is contradictory and contested and depends entirely on what you think elite forces are for. If elite forces exist to accomplish impossible missions regardless of cost, the 82nd succeeded brilliantly. Every objective assigned was achieved. Every crisis requiring rapid deployment was met. The division did the impossible repeatedly until the impossible became expected. If elite forces exist to provide cost-effective solutions to military problems, the 82nd's record is more problematic. They accomplished missions at casualty rates and monetary costs that regular infantry could have achieved more sustainably over longer timelines. The premium you pay for elite capability is justified only when speed is strategically critical, and speed was only strategically critical in some operations, not all. What's unchallengeable is that the 82nd became legendary through survival rather than through tactics. They kept accomplishing missions despite catastrophic dispersion, equipment failures, intelligence breakdowns, and employment that often wasted their specialized training. This resilience, the capacity to accomplish objectives anyway when everything goes wrong, is what separates elite from competent. Competent units execute well-planned operations effectively. Elite units execute catastrophically planned operations anyway, through improvisation, determination, and willingness to sustain casualties that would break other formations. The 82nd proved they were elite by surviving conditions designed to destroy them and accomplishing missions anyway. Whether this proves airborne operations are brilliant or just proves that tough soldiers can accomplish anything regardless of how they arrived at the battlefield remains contested. The final truth is that the 82nd Airborne Division that finished World War II was both exactly what it claimed to be and nothing like what it claimed. It was an elite airborne division that jumped into combat 4 times and proved the concept viable. It was also a conventional infantry division that spent 85% of combat time in missions that didn't require airborne delivery. It was a continuous organization with lineage stretching back to World War I. It was also a completely replaced organization where 78% of personnel joined after combat began. It was the most decorated and effective American division in Europe. It was also a formation that survived through consuming soldiers at unsustainable rates that required constant replacement to maintain combat effectiveness. All of these contradictions are true simultaneously. The men who wore the All-American patch and jumped into Normandy and fought through Germany